This podcast is made possible by the support of our Patreon community. Sign up for a monthly or annual membership at patreon.com/Anthony Desiato and choose from a range of rewards. This week, I want to spotlight our DC Tourist tier, which includes exclusive access to the monthly spin-off podcast Beyond Metropolis, where we apply the signature Digging for Kryptonite approach to the rest of the DC universe. Sign up today, and thank you to all patrons. This podcast is an affiliate of BCW Supplies. The next time you need to restock on comic book bags, boards, boxes, and more, be sure to use promo code FSP to save 10% on your order. That's FSP for Flat Squirrel Productions. It helps support the show too. Many of you have already used this code, and I greatly appreciate it. Thank you. Welcome to Digging for Kryptonite, a Superman fan journey. I'm your host, Anthony Desiato. Joining me to discuss the 2016 film Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice Ultimate Edition, directed by Zack Snyder and starring Ben Affleck and Henry Cavill, is returning guest, real-life Lobo cosplayer Justin DeVoe. Welcome back.
And you guys just heard me. Like, how special do you feel right now that you're like, wow, this was so close together? I'm stoked, man. I said a lot on Perry's about this when I went into my first rage. Well, like probably on that show, like my 8th one. But it was more about people, not about the movie. And then we talked about the movie a little bit, but I've been stoked about this. I knew that we did American Alien, which was awesome. And then we were doing this one like a week later. So I got really excited. I'm stoked, man.
Happy to have you back. And yes, you were just here for American Alien. We got some great feedback on that one. So thank you again for taking part. And you mentioned our mutual friend Perry, who hosts the Superhero Cinephiles podcast. Now, here on Digging for Kryptonite, Zach Moore and I, we ranked all of the DCEU movies, and then you and Perry did the same on his podcast. Now, as of this recording, that episode is not out yet. We don't know exactly when it's dropping, so I haven't heard it yet. I haven't heard all of your rankings. Without giving away the entire episode you did with our buddy Perry, can I just ask, where did Batman v Superman fall on your ranking?
Oh, you know what? I think it was 3, either 2 or 3.
Good man. As our audience knows, it was number 2 for me. And as is the case for this trilogy of episodes that we're doing here, it's all about taking a final, and I do mean that, at least for the time being, look back at the Snyderverse Trilogy with the benefit of time and distance and context and seeing where we land on these movies and sharing our takes passionately as we always do, but also being measured and even-handed and representing the other perspectives that are at play, because I know that people have some strong feelings about these movies. Now, I have been very vocal about my fandom of these films, and that's still very much in effect, but I have some new takeaways after watching it yet again.
Yeah.
But I want to toss it to you first, because one of my aims in booking guests for this event was to try to find people not who hate these movies, but who maybe didn't share in my love of them quite so much, just so that we could get some of those different perspectives. And so do you mind kind of sharing what you shared with me when I first reached out to you? And I was like, what's your take on Batman v Superman?
Yeah, actually, we might not agree on some of the stuff, which is why I was excited. Oh, by the way, Batman v Superman was number 3. Wonder Woman was 2. And Zack Snyder's Justice League was number 1. So the parts that I liked, I really liked. Plus, it was just a great time to be a lot like, oh my God, like they're finally doing it. I remember when I was watching I Am Legend, and in the background while he's speeding through New York City, there was a Batman v Superman poster. It was like crudely done or whatever, but it was in the background. And I just remember being like, that'll be the day. And then it's like, holy shit, it was here. I remember what the trailer did for me, especially when like all 3 of them converged. And I was like, and then we saw like the nightmare thing. And I was like, what the fuck? Like, there's so much going on in this movie. And then it came out and I didn't have the same problems everyone else had it. Mine were way different. Like, I didn't care that fucking Batman's flinging around corners, shooting at people. And if the truck blew up, he's like, no, I didn't kill him. They just kind of died on their own. Like, I didn't mind that. My problem was like, Doomsday was like number 1. Like, my main problem with that flick was like, why does he look like Bedrock from the original Youngbloods comic in like Image. If he starts off looking like that, I got no problem with that. But as he got beat up, it's a simple CGI, man. Give me like the rocks in the face and like the arms, like what? And they did. They came up like a little. I was like, that's a fucking layup, man. Like that just seemed to be such an easy way to knock off at least 50% of the people, the issues people had with the movie. So that was like my biggest thing. But that was overshadowed by how good that final fight was, man. Like that final fight was amazing. Like Batman with the Frank Miller lightning. And then Diana, like, listen, man, everyone found a new love when she hit the rock and then smirked and jumped right back into action. I was like, I'm good. I can go home now. But I left the theater feeling great. And I didn't realize people hated it until I got home and saw, fucking assholes being assholes and shit. And I'm just like, I don't get it. So the stuff I really didn't like about it, I really didn't like, but it was overshadowed by the stuff that I was like, God, that was just really cool. And we ranked it on watchability. Like I'll rewatch that movie all the time. I'll rewatch that flick all the time. Will I still hate the parts that I hate? Yeah, probably. But my biggest problem was with people and their complaints afterwards.
I understand. So I've addressed this over the years on the show. I came out of the theater in 2016 mixed on this, just as I came out mixed on Man of Steel, liking a lot, having issues with certain aspects, but always feeling like it was better than it was given credit for.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until I sat down with that Ultimate Edition, which restored about a half hour's worth of footage, and immersed myself in the 3-hour Ultimate Edition cut, where I really came to appreciate what the movie was doing, what it's going for. For preparation in advance of this episode, this was probably, I don't know, the 4th, 5th, maybe 6th time I've watched the Ultimate Edition. Yeah. And it's funny because when I had Zach Moore on and we did our DCEU ranking, I said that this movie, you feel spent when you're done. Like you just got done with a great workout. And I still stand by that to an extent, but I'll be honest, it'd probably be an exaggeration to say it flew by, but it really, I had a really good time rewatching this movie last night. And we'll get into all the specifics, but what I want to say, big picture, I think 2 things. Number one, where Man of Steel, I found my rewatch to be a very moving, emotional affair. Like I talked about this last week. I know you haven't heard it yet based on when we're recording, but man, I teared up during Man of Steel a bunch of times. I had to pause it a couple of times because I needed to kind of compose myself.
Yeah, of course.
Here, there were a couple of instances where we got close to that, but it was more where Man of Steel touched the heart. This one I found to be so mentally stimulating. I just thought it was fascinating the way this movie was constructed, how everything tied together, especially, and this is particularly clear when you watch the Ultimate Edition, how Lex was manipulating everyone and everyone's agendas and how it all fit together. So again, where Man of Steel really touched the heart, this one fed the mind, and I just found it really stimulating, really interesting. And honestly, the 3 hours went by very quickly. So that's number one, big picture. And then number two, I just feel like thematically, this was the fulfillment of what was set up in Man of Steel. If the central tenet of Man of Steel is that Clark's very existence is this paradigm shifting moment for the world, Batman v Superman shows you, okay, this is what happens when this person is out there in the world, the way he's viewed by everyone. He's celebrated, he's deified, he's criticized, he's questioned. And I think everything that Jonathan kind of spoke about, like people will fear what they don't know and the world is going to change. You see those changes. So again, I just feel like the through line from these movies, though there are a lot of differences from the first to the second, but I really feel like it builds upon and fulfills kind of the promises and the questions of that first film. So I came away from this, man, just still secure in my placement of BVS at number 2 on my overall ranking.
And also, like, say what you want about whether you like Snyder's direction or not, at least there was one. And when you watch the Ultimate Edition, that becomes very clear, right? Like the Apocalypse thing. See, and here's the thing. We were talking before we started rolling. I don't remember the theatrical version. I remember wanting to see it again. And the first thing I got was the Ultimate Edition because I do that with everything. If there's a special one, I'm going to get it. And that's the only one I remember. So maybe I did leave the theater going, huh. When I rewatched it, I remembered only big chunks. So when I rewatched the Ultimate Edition, I'm like, no, this is great. Like things started to make sense. Like they cut out a large part of the Africa thing where it was just like, wait a minute. Like now I can see what the real manipulation was. Like it wasn't flamethrowers, it was him, and they're trying to pin it on him. And it also finds like how Bruce gets the kryptonite in the first, but like a lot of stuff, I was like, wait a minute, yeah, how do you get a whole spear of like? I was like, stuff just came together, but much like Zack Snyder's Justice League, where it's like, oh, this is what was supposed to happen. But you could tell just by the beats of Batman versus Superman that he had a direction, man. He must have had a big board, and he's like, these are all the plans, and all this stuff is going to line up. If people just let me do what the fuck I need to do, everything's going to line up. And we all know what happened to all of his flicks theatrically. Everything got cut up, and it was just like, wow, like that turned into a disaster pretty quickly.
Totally. So I'm at the point, I really don't even acknowledge the theatrical cut of this movie anymore because the Ultimate Edition really does live up to its name. And I've said this before, and people probably those who are not a fan of this movie probably roll their eyes. But honestly, if you're listening to this and you've only ever seen the theatrical cut, you really have not seen this movie the way it should be seen. And you mentioned that opening or close to the opening sequence in Africa. And I think that's a prime example where they gutted that for the theatrical release. And I remember coming away from that not really having a firm handle on what exactly went down in Africa and what its larger implications were. And when you watch the Ultimate Edition, again, you see all of the pieces. And I promise I'm not going to do a scene-by-scene plot recap for this entire movie, but just for this Africa sequence, kind of in the broad strokes, when you watch the Ultimate Edition, right, you see that Lois shows up in Africa to interview this warlord, and she's met by who we come to find out is Jimmy Olsen, played by Michael Cassidy.
CIA agent.
Yeah, CIA agent Jimmy Olsen, who has taken the place of her usual contact. Yeah. Right. So she's surprised to find this guy there in place of her normal contact, and they end up going to this warlord. And in this scene, they're surrounded by these primarily Caucasian mercenaries with some pretty advanced weaponry. And there's a question about why are they there? Who's funding this and what's going on? Right. And one of these guys takes apart, quote unquote, Jimmy's camera and reveals
piece by piece, everything. A tracker device.
Right. And at first you're along with this. You're like, because you feel for him. He's like, hey, you're exposing the film and you're taking apart the camera. But then they find this little tracker. And then we see that there's the CIA operation, and this was all a cover. And it's funny, I've gone back and forth over the years as to whether or not that was actually Jimmy Olsen, and he's a CIA agent, versus this is a CIA agent who just used the name Jimmy Olsen as a cover.
And they just needed the name because they knew that Jimmy Olsen was a photographer. So they send the Jimmy Olsen there. Yeah. It could have been fixed later. But the fact of the matter is, he was like, fuck it, I'll make him a CIA agent. I'm like, I don't care enough about Jimmy Olsen for that to bother me. So I was just like, oh, cool, Jimmy Olsen's a CIA agent. Like, I didn't give a shit. It really didn't matter to me.
From what I've read of Snyder's interviews, that was meant to be the actual Jimmy Olsen, because in his 5-film arc, he didn't have plans for Jimmy, and he felt like, well, I'll just throw him in here, even though we're going to kill him off right away, but he'll be in there. And your mileage may vary on whether or not you like that, but that's kind of the idea behind it. In any event, so Jimmy Olsen is exposed and is very quickly executed by this warlord here, who then takes Lois into this kind of inner chamber. CIA agents make plans to launch this drone over the protestations of one of the other operatives out in the field there. And while all of this is going on, the mercenaries who we saw before open fire on the rest of
their guys,
the guys, right, in this area. And not only do they shoot and kill them, and this is such a key piece, and I feel like this was totally lost, but when you watch the Ultimate Cut, it's like, oh, this makes all the sense in the world now. Yeah. They use flamethrowers to burn the bodies of those they've shot. And now, when you get deeper into the movie and this whole idea of Superman being blamed for these deaths, it makes a ton more sense.
Yeah. And that's why I was like, you can't cut that out if you want then everything else leading up to it, up to that like big crescendo to be like, well, he destroyed this village. Well, where's the fucking proof of that in the theatrical cut? Like, that doesn't make any sense. All we saw was them shooting, because I had to do a side by side. I'm like, when you take out the flamethrower, he also has the flamethrower again in the end. Like, that's just that guy's fucking weapon of choice, right? But like, if you take that out, the girl's statement of, he burned down our village or whatever, I was like, no, like, when? Like, did I miss that? Was that off camera somewhere? And I was just like, you can't take something like that out. But, like, they did that with everything. We're just like, we'll just give them some action beats and shit, and we'll sell a movie that way. People don't want that if the continuity is not right.
Absolutely. That's the thing. Because I remember coming, and I don't want to dwell on the differences between these cuts. We recognize the ultimate cut. That's the one to watch. But all to say that I remember coming out of that first viewing, and really, I think one of my questions was like, why would they think Superman killed those people? They're riddled with bullets. Why would they think it's Superman? But then you watch this and it's, oh no, their bodies were burned. And then again, you see Superman.
And they found one of the bullets, which they kept in the theatrical version. But you already said that he destroyed a village. What do you do? Go down and shoot people? So again, the two didn't really go together.
Right. But right in this sequence, because then you also have Superman destroy the missile fired by the drone. And then you have him, and of course, this was a scene that everybody saw in the movie, even in the theatrical cut, of Superman rescuing Lois
standoff
from that warlord. And I do, just as a side note, I love that moment between them, because you really kind of feel the 18 months that have passed in between Man of Steel and BVS, where there's this shorthand between them. As soon as he lands, this moment of relief, and her hands, because she's like, oh, I know exactly what we're doing here.
He's gonna, It's so good.
It's so good. But in that sequence, and then of course, over the rest of the movie, Lois later will find, again, one of those bullets in her journal, in her notebook, and she'll follow that thread and ultimately learn that it came from LexCorp, that Lex Luthor is the one who financed those mercenaries who were there.
Right.
But that scene alone is so critical, and it's so early in the movie. That's why it really breaks my heart that it was ripped apart the way it was, because right there, this notion of Superman interfering in this geopolitical affair in a very fraught situation feeds into all of these larger conversations about every action is a political action.
Right.
And should he act unilaterally? And he's engaging in these state level interventions. So that's there. But then also, again, Luthor's involvement and Luthor's pulling of the strings here, such a critical component of this movie. And so I feel like that Africa sequence is a microcosm of what this movie is trying to do. And like, there's so many threads at play there. And again, getting to see all of it together, beautiful. Fat Moose Comics is New Jersey's best and oldest comic book store. Established in 1982 and under new ownership since 2020, Moose sells a wide selection of comics from every publisher and time period, along with action figures, graphic novels, posters, statues, and more. If you're looking for something and they don't have it, they can probably get it for you. They know a guy. Visit Fat Moose in Whippany the next time you're in the Garden State, and be sure to reach out via the Fat Moose Comics Facebook page. I'm a proud backer of the Paragons of Earth comic book project, now available to support on Kickstarter. The creative team of Percival Constantine, Thomas DJ, and Eric Johns have plucked forgotten Golden Age superheroes from the public domain, reinvented them as their own sort of Justice League, and put them up against a Lovecraftian apocalypse. Back this project and learn more by going to percivalconstantine.com/paragons. Also, Perry, a multiple-time guest on Digging for Kryptonite, hosts the Superhero Cinephiles podcast about comic book-inspired films. Be sure to listen wherever you get podcasts.
If people didn't like the movie because that wasn't the version of Superman and Batman that they wanted, fine. You can't mess with somebody if they got 80 years worth of work to work with and they only like one version. There's nothing you can do about that. You can't please 100% of the people 100% of the time. If they had a problem with the continuity, that I understand. I didn't like that either, after realizing that I watched more of the ultimate cut than the original one. There's other things that if people have a problem with, they're fucking stupid. And not saying that they're stupid, the issue is stupid because of not having experience. Number one, the yelling of Martha, which we're going to get to, and the fight with him not worrying about collateral damage. Clearly, these two comments are spoken by people who, A, have never been in a fight where they had to protect somebody. I have. I'm not proud of it. Believe me, I'm not proud of about 15 years of my life, right? Anyone who's never been in a brawl or had to fight someone off so that person doesn't hurt anybody else, you don't know about collateral damage because you've never been in that situation. Number two, instead of going, we'll get there when we get there. Do you want to do the Martha thing first?
Let's do the Martha thing because I know it's the thing. And
okay.
The last thing I want to say by means of setup is again, a big picture when we talk about just this take on the characters, Superman especially, but Batman as well, and just this mythology, I will forever maintain my diplomatic stance where if it's not your cup of tea, I totally get it. And I do understand the criticisms that have been levied against this. At the same time, like I said, I want to share my feelings truthfully and passionately. And one of the things that I kept coming to as I was rewatching this last night, especially when we talk about the Superman of it all,
right,
and the criticisms against this presentation of the character, that he's not the heroic version of Superman that we're all familiar with. I'm watching this movie and I'm like, and I say this with love, folks, are we watching the same movie?
No, people who have that argument just wanted to find something they didn't like about the movie because they didn't like the movie. Because that's not a real thought-based argument. I got to tell you that right now. If the best you can come up with is that, you're a fucking idiot. And I don't care. You can look me up. You can look, because you did not think about it. Like, I'm sorry, you didn't think about it. If he's not like, how long has he been operating for? Since Man of Steel to BVS, how long was that?
18 months, as we're told in that on-screen text at the beginning.
All right. In 18 months, as we know, he grew up with these powers, trying to figure them out. He is now in this big city where he is now a superhero. Okay. He's a big superhero now. Motherfuckers can't even find their way in their own job where they're not saving people in 18 months. What version of fucking hero, realistically, do you want him to be overnight? Like, what do you want? If you want to make it realistic, what do you think? He just got up and was like, well, I'm going to do all this stuff now. He's got to deal with, which is why I like the tone of this movie, a very angry government, a very series of angry governments, a bunch of people that in those news clips are like, he's just trying to play God and who the fuck is this guy and blah, 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 blah. Meanwhile, ladies and gentlemen, he can hear all of these things. He's trying to keep his girlfriend safe more than anything, which she even said, hey man, I had it handled. Like, you didn't have to. He's like, what do you want me to do? Like, keep my girlfriend in that position? I got to do it. These people who are like, he's not this, you're not thinking about the movie the way it's supposed to be thought of. You can't think about this. Like, look, it goes from here to fucking here. In that amount of time, he's had to juggle all of this shit. And you just, and the fight with Zod that almost ended a planet. Okay. What did you expect him to do? There's no fucking manual for being a superhero here, man. There's nothing like that. He lost his dad, talks to his mom every once in a while. He is the literal translation of stranger in a fucking strange land. He can do all these things, but he's not allowed to. Should I do it? The government's going to get mad. I don't want to hear he's not fucking heroic enough, because he's not heroic enough comes straight from people going, well, in this issue, guy, it's not this issue. It is a real life situation where this is a very, very dark world that Snyder painted. It's not he's going to fly by a bunch of doves and wave a fucking American flag. It's not the Reeve Superman, man. Hey, I hate to break it to you guys. That will always live in the annals of history. That is not this. That is fucking apples and oranges. They're both fruit, but you cannot compare the two. This is the version that he's doing as a hero because this is what he knows right now. You want him to make better decisions? You should have let Zach run with the movies, and then he would have gave you like the Kingdom Come Superman, where he's a little bit more thought out about this shit. I'm sorry if the guy's got to fucking figure out who he is, where he came from, who he is now, who's fucking Batman, who's this Wonder Woman shit. Come on, man, stop. People don't think when they say shit. They just want to argue. And that's what makes me mad about it, because you're not even bringing a good argument to the table. Well, he's not. Well, what is he supposed to do then? People's like, he's not heroic enough. Okay, when was he not heroic enough? And what would you have liked him to do?
That's the thing. I feel like a lot of this often, my sense of it at least, revolves around what's perceived to be a more somber take on the character. But again, look at what he's doing. And you have this whole montage of saves juxtaposed with all of these talking heads questioning. And we've cited this many times on the show over the years, but all these questions about, again, him being revered kind of as this essentially religious figure, God among men.
Yeah.
And the one talking head raising this question of, well, what if he's not the devil or Jesus? What if he's just a guy
trying
to do
good.
the right thing? And as you watch him perform all of these saves, and I know the one that often gets cited, I promise we'll get to Martha, but this is important to set the table here. I know one of the things that gets cited a lot is the image of him floating above the family during the flood.
The flood.
And it's, why is he just floating there? I think what's really important to keep in mind here, and I think that scene and the Dia de los Muertos scene, I think the two of those go hand in hand, of him being deified by these people. And that whole montage really is such a linchpin to this entire movie, because I believe it's there. Maybe it's in a separate scene, but when Clark sees the news footage of the defacing of his monument. I mean, first, the fact that there even is a monument, a statue of him. And then Wallace, the Wayne employee who lost his legs in the battle for Metropolis and Man of Steel, which of course we see at the beginning of this movie, has defaced it with spray paint and written false God. So here's Clark, this guy who doesn't purport to be a god, yet is being seen in this way and then taken down in that way. Yeah. And as he's performing these saves, you think about, again, the context of all this. And I said this in the last episode, you really do have to buy into the setting here, that we are in the quote unquote real world, and really exploring what it would be like if this sort of figure existed. And if you don't like that, or you don't want to buy into it, I get it. And I think that would really create a roadblock to enjoying this movie.
That's what I was going to say. If you're not seeing it like that, don't fucking bother watching the movie, because that's the world that was created. If it's the world that it's created and you expected him to be like the happy-go-lucky, like, you're not going to get that, because it's the world that was created. So if your problem is that, your problem is the movie, don't watch it. Don't watch it. But you can't be like, well, he should be more like this. In this world that was created, he can't be like that. It's not going to make sense to the movie. He's doing the best version of that in the one that we got.
Right. And in the Dia de los Muertos rescue, where he lands after saving that woman from the fire, and everyone kneels down before him. I mean, you think about what the effect would be just psychologically, how off-putting that would be for this farmer. That's
what I was saying.
Essentially, the farmer's son to be worshipped, essentially.
That's what I was saying.
And similarly,
he's not going to be like, maybe 2 years down the line, everyone stand up. No, don't do that. This guy, like, people over there, it's 18 months, man. 18 months. If people start kneeling down, what is he supposed to be? Yell at everyone to get the fuck up? Then he looks like an asshole. You know what I'm saying? Of course he's going to be shocked that they're all doing that. It's just like, I don't know, like, people took the humanity right out of him. And that's the thing that we like about him the most. The fact that he's trying to juggle these two things at once. I got news for you. If I saved a kid from like a burning building and I came outside and people started hugging me, I would have fucking stood there the same way. Because I don't know what to fucking do in that situation. I don't.
Exactly.
And I don't think he knows much more either. You know what I'm saying?
And in the flood scene, I think people sort of erroneously focus on Superman in that scene. I think what's really more important is the woman. And I think it's important how the camera moves from, I think, the father and son to the mother in that scene. And yes, you could just kind of look at it as, oh, she's, tears of relief, but the tears that she's displaying, it goes beyond that. It really is this.
I noticed that today too.
This religious worship that's at play. And it's no accident that we see Superman from her perspective up in the clouds. Like again, you're seeing in that scene the way, not everyone, right? Because clearly there are mixed opinions on Superman, but the way a lot of people, this woman and some of the others that he's rescued, see him as this god. So
how else would you see him though?
Right.
These people have never seen anything like this. You got a guy, you thought you were dead, your family's dead. You painted this guy's thing on the top because now you don't have to pray to a god anymore. You have somebody, whether you think he's a god or not, who's going to come save you. They painted this thing on the top of their house. He showed up and saved her. How the fuck would you react? You wouldn't cry? Her son and her dad and the dog, whoever the fuck is there, was just about to die and he shows up. You're goddamn right. Everyone watched that movie would have reacted the same way. And if they said they wouldn't, they're full of shit. He's supposed to be revered like that in that situation. Think about there's 9.7 billion people on the planet. He shows up to your house to help you and your family. You're not going to think that you were touched by some sort of angel. They also don't know what the fuck he is anyway.
Right. So all that to say that in this context that we are provided, I think the Superman we get tracks more than tracks. And what's important throughout this movie is, going back to our tagline for this podcast, it's about what he does. It's about the actions. I know whether people have different images from other incarnations or whatever it might be of kind of the smiling and waving Superman. Again, I think what's really important here is what he does. And this culminates when we get to the climax of the movie with this ultimate act of sacrifice. And we'll talk about whether or not they should have gone as far as the death of Superman, whether or not they should have used Doomsday, and how they should have visualized Doomsday, which is probably the biggest problem I have. But ultimately, when you get down to it, he shows the world through his actions. And this is actually something that I was really thinking about, because I said to myself, might the movie have been better served? Might it have alleviated some of people's concerns if Superman in particular, less so Clark, because Clark is fairly vocal in that scene with Lois, and certainly as a reporter, butting heads with Perry, investigating the Batman in Gotham, which is
instead of the football game,
which is a fantastic part of this movie, and also speaks to what I was saying before. Of like, are we watching the same movie? Because you see Clark crusading for the little guy and the poor section of Gotham, all that. But then I was wrestling with this, because you do have the moment where Superman shows up to testify at the congressional hearing, and this was, I have to imagine, a very conscious choice that the bomb in Wallace's wheelchair goes off before Superman has a chance to utter a word. And one of the things I was thinking about, again, would the movie have been better served by this? Would people have found it more palatable if the movie had allowed Superman to speak his mind before the bomb went off?
Right.
And maybe that would have been a better choice. I don't know. But at the same time, I kind of come back to this idea that it was more about what he did throughout this movie. And so I do actually respect the choice to kind of not give us that. Again, it's a very specific choice and it has an effect. But again, in terms of this larger story that's being told, I can get behind it. Now, we'll continue unpacking. We'll continue jumping around. But as promised, let's talk about the Martha of it all. Because this is one of those things with Man of Steel, a million memes and jokes and snide comments about Jonathan and the tornado. And we talked about that last week. Similarly here, even more so, when you talk about the memes and the jokes and all that, so much has been made out of the Martha moment. So let me toss it to you first.
Okay. We live in a world where if you have trauma, people will be like, don't do that to him. He has trauma, trigger warnings and blah, 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 and all the rest of that shit. Right. Okay. You have a person that dresses like a bat who has not resolved the death of his parents, which is why he's still doing what he does. He doesn't know Superman's mother. His name is Martha. He also doesn't know that Superman knows that his name was Martha. He's just about to kill this guy that he really knows nothing about. In this situation, that's why they show you in the beginning to remind you that his parents are gunned down. I think they could have left that out. I think the reason why that's in there is because in this situation, out of fucking nowhere, this alien goes, save Martha. Now, the people who complain about this shit must have either tried to act tough or have truly never experienced trauma in their life. Because the reason why they're called fucking trigger words, you dopes, is because when you say something like that, it will bring you to a place where it stuns you. And if you don't have one of those, you've never lived through trauma, which is why we can't use certain words in society now. People go off in a certain way. You think the guy, to quote, who dresses like a bat every night and beats these people up for the memory of, I can't have crime here. You think out of the blue, when this guy's laying on the ground dying, he says, make sure you save Martha. If you thought he was going to react any other way, you know nothing about trauma. You also have never dealt with it, which means fucking congratulations. But you're full of shit, because out of nowhere, this guy says your mom's name, your mom, the one that got gunned down outside of a fucking movie theater trying to save you. Out of nowhere, he says that name, and you thought Bruce's reaction was wrong? why'd you say that name? Of course. Did you even see the look on his face through the thing? He was brought back to childhood, man. That was heart-wrenching, which is why when people start to fuck around, I'm like, oh, all you crusaders about, treat everyone with respect. And, if people have trauma and stuff, you were real quick to jump on that shit because you thought it was fucking funny. You just saw a full-grown man who, for all intents and purposes, is a superhero. He saves people's lives, turn into a child. And when he said, why did you say that name? I don't think he was saying I think he was like, how do you know my mom? That's what I thought it was. And for anyone to think any other way, you just wanted to jump on the shitty meme train and be an asshole. Because when Captain America said, save Bucky, no one had a fucking problem with that, which was the same thing, which that one made less sense. This one, there's trauma here. People talk about it for years. This guy has unresolved trauma that they don't know if he is the Batman. He doesn't even know if he's Batman or Bruce Wayne. Like, which one is the main one? You've seen what happened to this guy. He's a recluse. The only person he trusts is his butler. And you're shocked that he was stunned that this guy who he doesn't know from a fucking hole in the wall said his mom's name and how he reacted. You guys are assholes. You're also full of shit. So that's how I feel about that.
I appreciate the passion, man. I do. In that moment, Clark is able to get through unknowingly, right, to Bruce, the boy within that man.
Yeah.
And I think...
And you saw it in his face.
And I think this is a good opportunity, actually, to turn to a patron question, because this question from our pal, Brian Dempsey, I think this sort of represents the other perspective. And I'm going to share his comment. And I suspect as I'm saying it, there will be a lot of people nodding along. And then I'm going to respectfully rebut that argument, building off of what you just said.
I'm with it.
So Brian said, the elephant in the room for this movie, Save Martha. Why do you think it ultimately fell flat for the audience? I remember Zack Snyder and Chris Terrio, the screenwriter, patting themselves on the back for finding the greatest coincidence in comic books. But one, comic book fans knew and didn't care. Turns out general audiences didn't care either. Two, the argument that I recall for it was that it humanizes Superman. So does the basic fact that he has a mother. Save My Mom would have had an effect too, and we would have avoided, why did you say that name? Batman could have relented, and then they could have bonded over the name when Clark says, Lex is holding my mother somewhere, her name is Martha, to which Bruce is slightly taken aback and quickly replies, that's my mother's name too. That's it. That's the scene. They brought in a non-fan scriptwriter who latched onto the wrong and most inconsequential fact of Clark and Bruce. Oh well, the memes will live on forever. So first, let me say, I'm a big fan of Chris Terrio. He also wrote Affleck's movie Argo. Yeah. I think what he did here and in Justice League, but especially here, was like really kind of fascinating. And I like the different perspective that he brought to this. I think Brian hits on a core aspect here. I think most viewers of this movie get that this scene generally is what allows Bruce to see Clark as a man, as a person, not just this object to be destroyed. Mm-hmm. But I think what's missed is what you were just speaking about, and which I'll add to, which is that you need the utterance of the word Martha to break through the state.
He stopped everything he was doing.
Yes.
He said Affleck acted that perfectly, because it would have like getting shot in the gut. How many times have you think Bruce has heard his mom's name? Alfred doesn't say it. He probably just says your parents. He doesn't really go out anywhere. No one really mentions his parents. Now you got this guy who's just about to kill, who says it. I don't think he knew that actually happened or not. I think Batman, in the state that Batman's in, might have thought that he dreamed that shit up. Now, I love Brian. He always brings great questions. I think when you look at it from his perspective, yeah, sure. But you can't look at the Superman in that perspective. Superman's concern is go save my mom. Of course, then he should say that. But that wasn't a Superman moment, guys. That was a Batman moment. That was a Bruce moment, because he had the killing blow, man. It was right there. It actually showed the best parts of both those characters. Number one, Superman didn't care about getting killed in that moment. Right. He cared about his mother. Okay. It also showed the humanity that we have not seen with Bruce in that moment, getting basically gut punched and not knowing what fucking planet he was on at that point. That was a Superman moment in as much as he cares about his mom more than him, but it's also the Batman moment, because nothing would have stopped him unless it was that name. Not my mother has the same name, not go save my mom. He'd be like, fuck you. And like, we saw that version. He's a gritty version. The only thing that puts the brakes on in that moment is that name, the way it was done. That was a Superman setup moment for how awesome he is. And it was the perfect moment to make everything in Batman's world stop. And he actually took a couple steps back. And the reason why he kept saying it is because I don't think he believed it was actually said. I think that's 30 years of trauma coming out in one shot. And he literally didn't even know if he was an adult at that point or if he was a child in an alley. So if people just looked at it from the one direction, you're wrong. I love you, but you're wrong. You should have looked at it from both directions, and it wouldn't be such a joke, especially for the people in the fucking audience, maybe who's lost a parent. But people don't want to think about that. They want to share memes and shit. What if someone lost a parent and saw that, was like, holy shit, like I would do the same thing, or lost someone close to them? No, anything to get a laugh, anything to get a meme. Let's fucking share it. We're all so fucking witty. If you did not see the trauma in that, think about all your friends that went through trauma and saw how you treated that and decided not to say anything to you because you want to be an asshole. Period.
I look at the utterance of Martha as akin to the light from the bat signal piercing the dark sky.
Yeah. Yep.
In the state that Bruce was in, that's what he needed to pull him out of it. And I don't think there's anything else that would have pulled him out of that. To your point, had Clark, in response to Brian's question, had Clark just said, save my mother, save my mom, that wouldn't have done it. You needed this.
Also, I saved the second barrel for this because I wanted to get to this too. What happened in the beginning of the movie? He drives in. He runs into the fog. Who does he run into? Does he run into a girl who's looking for her father? Oh no, that's fucking right. He sees a lot of himself in the girl when he says, we'll save your mom. Where is she? And she points at a fucking burning building.
And that's the thing where I remember, I know I've talked about this before, but I remember, by the way, at some point I'm going to do a Batman podcast series. It's only a matter of when, and do I do it alongside this one, as part of this one, after this one is done? Because I love Batman. And even though I come at this movie from the Superman perspective, I can also appreciate the Batman of it all. And so I don't want to discount that. And one day on that other podcast series, we'll watch this movie again squarely from the perspective of Batman. But I remember watching this at Alamo Drafthouse. And for anyone not familiar with that chain of theaters, which is my go-to theater, and they have them across the country, they do the pre-show reel where they'll put together clips from various TV shows, movies, news programs, whatever it is, that are related to what you're about to see. And I remember one of the things they put together before BVS was a montage of all of the times in other media adaptations that we've seen Thomas and Martha Wayne meet their end. And it got, comical isn't the right word, but at a certain point you're watching all of these and it's like, oh man, they've really done this a lot. Right. And then I remember that's where this movie, and I remember that moment in the theater of, I think probably rolling my eyes to an extent of like, oh, here they go again, just like we saw in that pre-show reel. But here's the difference. This movie, first of all, they didn't dwell on it. I think they did it very efficiently in that opening sequence, but more importantly, they earned it. It was for a reason. And we talked about this a lot last week with Man of Steel and especially the killing of Zod, and where maybe the movie fell a little bit short when we're talking about setups and payoffs. And here with the Martha of it all, to your point, like there's a very specific reason why this movie opens with the murder of the Waynes. I think it serves two functions. One, you then move to adult Bruce seeing the destruction of Metropolis and feeling the same sense of powerlessness that he felt as a child. And that, going back to triggers, that triggers something in him, awakens that cruelty.
Anyone that knows anything about cinematography knows when you shoot somebody from top down, it is meant to make them look small and helpless. They didn't show him face to face with the girl and him looking up. They showed from the building's perspective down because they wanted to relay with movie magic that he was a child again, with the inability to do anything when shit crumbled around him. The crumbling building may as well have been giant fucking pearls in his eyes, man. But no one wants to hear that shit because no one wants to think about it.
1,000%. And so not only does it serve that function, it sets up his entire perspective for this movie and the reason for his animosity towards Superman. And I think even at my most mixed towards this movie, I always bought into that central conflict, specifically from Bruce's perspective. So that opening, I think, is so effective. And it also, we talked last time about the destruction of Metropolis in Man of Steel. And I feel like even just the opening of this movie earns a lot, because I think it takes all of that destruction and really shows you the toll of it in a more personal way. So I appreciate what it was able to build upon here. But the other thing with that opening is that you have Thomas saying Martha as they both perish in that alley there.
Yeah.
And not only do you have that, later in the movie, you have Bruce visiting the crypt, right? And seeing the names of his parents, specifically Martha. So you're shown that, right, a couple of times throughout the movie. So they're planting the seed for that, for the importance of it. What I will say, in fairness, maybe there was something in the execution that could have alleviated some of the reactions. Really, the only thing that I come to is, I think at that point in the scene, Bruce's voice modulator was a little damaged, but it was still that modified voice. And I think the only thing that I would have changed, and maybe this wouldn't have changed anyone's mind, but I think for me, maybe it would have resonated even more, is if it were truly just his voice and we didn't have any of that modulation at that point when he's like, because I think that's, but why would you say that name? But if you kind of take that away from it, maybe it would have,
even if it was breaking a little bit, as if like a kid's voice was cracking. Yeah. Like I understand that and shit. But in that, I mean, I don't know what the decision was. Maybe it's because they still wanted him. He was maybe symbolically he still holds the power, which is why the voice sounds like that. But clearly, visually, he's crumbling.
Yeah.
Which, like, both scenes take place in crumbling. Like, I don't know, man. Like, that's what makes me mad. Like, people always ask for deeper movies and a deeper meaning and stuff like that. And they're like, oh, everything just can't be punching. Then when someone gives it to you, who, by the way, dude he's no stranger to trauma himself, man.
Yeah.
Like, when they give that to you, people want punching again. If you gave him too much punching, there's not enough feeling behind it. If it's too dark, it's got to be lighter. If it's too light, it's got to be dark. It's just like, if you sat people in a room and actually had conversations about shit like this, you might change a couple's minds. But when people are in the wave of, I'm going to make a meme to see if I can get some laughs, you're not now thinking with an individualized brain. You're thinking with a mob mentality, which is why you get a bunch of people around people filming fights and stuff like that, because they want to be the first person to post it. Like, I think that most people didn't even think about that scene. They only thought about it because someone else brought it up and they wanted to jump on the bandwagon, man. Because if you thought about it through the eyes of a traumatized child, you would have saw it differently. But I guess that's just for us who've experienced trauma when we were younger. You know what I'm saying? Like, I don't know.
Now, I will reiterate, I've been referring to this event as come together. So I still do hope all of us, regardless of where we land on this movie, can.
Oh, no, have dude, no. When people have it, like, Brian's opinion was great. He's entitled to it. I was like, yeah, dude, I totally understand. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the people who just did it to jump on some fucking bandwagon. That's always been my problem. Because when you sit down and talk to those people, 90% of the time, they're like, yeah, well, I kind of see your point. But when you're in the throes of everyone wants to be cooler than a person, or you can't possibly be like, guys, did you ever think about it like this? Because then you're the target. I just don't give a fuck. You just like you make a meme out of me crying. You put a little fucking teardrop out here. You know what? It don't make a difference to me. I saw a boy crying without actually crying. Yeah. And that to me made perfect sense in that. That was the only thing that could have stopped him in that point. You wanted to stop him dead? That's what stopped him dead. Yeah. But again, you can only understand that if your mind is open, or if you've experienced it before, or don't want to jump on the douche bandwagon.
And to that point, it is worth mentioning with all of these movies, I think that part of the reaction against them from people who did see the movies, I think, was that you probably had certain expectations. I think these movies do defy expectation, but in a good way. But I do think it requires an open mind, and it requires, again, buying into the setup, buying into the context, and being open to this kind of interpretation, which I do think has a lot of validity to it. And look, I've heard complaints from people who have never watched the Ultimate Edition of this movie, or who have never rewatched these movies. And I'm not discounting their opinion, But at the same time,
Oh,
I
I do.
think when you, fair enough.
I do.
But I think that being willing to kind of work with the material, there's something to be said for that. And as someone who has done that, as someone who has rewatched these movies and spent time with them, like I've given this a lot of thought, like probably more thought than I should, but it's really been, for me as a fan of these characters, I found it to be incredibly valuable. So again, I don't direct this necessarily towards people who have spent the time with the movies and it's just not their cup of tea. I get it. But I think for those who were so quick to dismiss it, missing something. And like I said last time, I hope people could see what I see, what we see, because there's, I think, a really beautiful movie here. And to your point, this was the other thing that I was so struck by, was like, for the first 2 hours of this movie, until we get to the fight between Batman and Superman, there is very little action. There are some
trying to tell you a story.
But they're telling you a story, and that's
trying to tell you a story.
And I didn't miss.
He had a
long-term
goal. That's
the thing. And so many of these movies, we've seen them made by a lot of cooks in the kitchen, undergo a lot of reshoots. We've seen a lot of these movies, DC movies in particular, and I won't dwell on this because we did our whole DCEU discussion, but we've seen a lot of these DC movies in particular at war with themselves over what they're trying to be. And for better or worse, regardless of where you land, like these Snyder movies have a very clear, and I know people roll their eyes when I say vision, but they have a vision, they have a purpose.
They have to.
And they have a very sure hand behind them telling a very specific story. And even if I don't agree with every choice, and I don't agree with every choice, we'll get to Doomsday, but I can still respect it and I can get behind it because it's like, all right, man, like this was about something in to me, a meaningful way.
You also have to be in a situation where we're not now, because everyone's a fucking expert on everything. You got to have the ability to say that you were wrong, right? I said about a year ago, I don't give an aquatic fuck, which is to me my favorite line about Aquaman 2. And you know what? Had to watch it for the ranking system. Really enjoyed it.
Good.
I did. I really enjoyed it. I thought it was a really good flick, man. So I'll eat my words on that. I got no problem doing that.
No, but look, we're here. The discussion around it has been the discussion around it. One of the things that, I'm particularly interested in just looking at the movie that we have, right?
Yeah.
There's all the noise around it, but then there's the movie we have and our opportunity to really talk about it. And again, this central conflict between the two of them, what I love about it is that, like we talked about, you have, I think, a very real, believable, and powerful reason for Bruce to want to take Clark down after what he lived through during the battle for Metropolis. And I've quoted this many times over the years, but that speech to Alfred, if there's even a 1% chance that he could take us all out, we have to treat it as an absolute certainty.
That's right.
And misguided though he might be, there is something to that. And especially when you factor in what he's lived through, the idea that he would make this his quest independently makes sense. And then when you factor in Lex's manipulation of him along the way, those letters in particular that he sends to him, right? Those canceled checks from Wallace, the former employee, that culminate in that final message of "you let your parents die." Yeah. And you just see how this is egging him on, along with all these other events like the Capitol bombing that Bruce is witnessing, not even to mention the nightmare sequence, which we'll talk about. But, you see all of these things coming together. But then from Clark's perspective, and Clark specifically, as this reporter investigating the Bat vigilante in Gotham, who has, again, embraced this cruelty streak and has gone so far as branding these criminals that he's, tying up for the police.
And it says in the beginning, he's been operating Gotham for 20 years. We saw what Gotham looked like in this movie. What did you expect him to do? Trust this guy? There was no way he was going to trust him.
It's interesting when Alfred says, but he is not our enemy, because in Man of Steel, there's that key moment where Chris Maloney's character, the military man, he tells the soldiers to stand down. He's like, this man is not our enemy.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, again, just truly buying into that conflict. And what I also love, and I was saying this before, Clark the reporter, one of the things that I talked about last week that I didn't love about Man of Steel was that him becoming a reporter really felt kind of tacked on at the end. It was this cover that he needed. And like I said, I kind of would have liked this idea of him working as a reporter as he's traveling the world trying to figure out where he comes from. But then I argued against myself, and it's like, I think that movie was showing that he wasn't fully engaged, right, with any aspect of his life until he had that journey of self-discovery. And I give this movie a lot of credit because, and I think a lot of these scenes, as memory serves, did not make it into the theatrical cut. Because I remember watching the Ultimate Edition, like there was so much more of Clark as the reporter. For example, we get this business about the criminals that Batman brands. They get killed when they go to prison. So it's like
they go to jail,
so
stand up.
He's marking them for death, essentially. And then, of course, the added layer to this is that Lex's henchman is instigating at least one of these murders, maybe all of them. We don't know the full extent of it. And there's a scene of Clark speaking with the widow and the child, right, of one of these inmates who was killed. And so there are all these moments, not to mention, again, Clark standing up to Perry about covering this in the first place. Perry just wants this guy to go over across the bay and cover sports. And Clark wants to get to the bottom of what's been going on. And the parallels are interesting because when we get to those talking heads about Superman, there's this question of who Superman chooses to save, right? And why does he get to decide, and what implications does that have? And Clark makes a very similar argument to Perry about every time you run a story, you're making a choice about who to cover, whose voice to amplify, who to shine a light on.
Yeah.
And so I just seeing what I loved about this, and what I think hadn't fully registered with me until I rewatched it, was just this notion that being a reporter has become more to Clark and for Clark than the cover that I think it was at the end of the prior movie. And I like that because I think it would have been really easy to keep it superficial, to keep it that, it's just kind of this cover that's convenient for him and it allows him to be in the middle of the action. But they took it a step further, and there was actually something behind it. And you saw that it was something he cared about, and you got to see another side to his character because, like we talked about, as Superman in this movie, he doesn't verbally articulate a lot. And maybe that was a source of frustration for people. Maybe it was for me even the first time. Again, I think in this context, it makes sense, and so much is being said about him, and it's more about what he does as Superman. But I think as Clark, getting to see him active and vocal goes such a long way. So again, to see this conflict from Bruce's side, very powerful, very palpable, but then also to see Clark, right, investigating what this Bat vigilante has wrought in Gotham. At its heart, I think it holds up.
I loved that dude. To me, they pictured Gotham perfectly, man. Like where the cops go in and he saves all the sex trafficking girls, and they go to open up the gate and they close it. There's like, he's still upstairs. Like, yeah, he saved us, but he's still upstairs. And like the screen, like, when we talk about when we watch even in a comic, like the reaction you have to someone just like not stopping punching someone, i.e. like Bane beating up Batman. The sounds from upstairs, I was like, they made that sound like a horror show. Like it was perfect. And it was just like, yeah, he saved us. We still don't want to go out there yet because he's still here. Like in terms of how they built the way Gotham looked, it was just, it was awesome, man. Like I love that scene with him in the fucking corner. I remember seeing that in the trailer and I was like, oh, dude, I'm in, man. He just looks so good out there, dude.
We reference the television series Smallville a lot around here, and there's one Smallville rewatch podcast that's always at the top of my queue. Always Hold On to Smallville, hosted by our pal, Zach Moore. Zach and his guests bring tremendous insight, passion, and humor as they discuss each and every episode of the series that ushered in the renaissance of superhero TV. Listen to Always Hold On to Smallville wherever you get podcasts, and keep an eye out for the other shows under the Always Hold On to banner, including Arrow, DC's Legends of Tomorrow, Superman and Lois, and Star Wars.
Hey everyone, I'm Marshall and she's
Courtney, and we're your hosts of Blurred Watchers podcast here on the Pop Break.
Come hang out with us as we discuss, cross-examine, theorize, summarize, and review our favorite offerings.
And tangents, there will be tangents, whether it be live, streaming, or anything in between. If we watch it and think it's cool, we invite you to come hang with us as we all talk about it.
Our episodes post every third Monday on the Pop Break podcast feed.
See you there. Bye.
Aw Yeah Comics celebrates and promotes everything that is wonderful about comics, toys, artwork, and the joy they bring to people. Visit them in person at one of their 3 locations, Harrison, New York, aka my local comic shop, Skokie, Illinois, or Muncie, Indiana. If you have kids and have been looking for a family-friendly store, look no further. Join All Yeah for exciting events, including creator signings, how-tos, and more. Visit allyeahcomics.com and follow All Yeah on social media for more. Their name says exactly how they feel about it. Say it with me now. Aw, yeah. There's a lot going on in this movie. There are a lot of threads. Certainly the Batman of it all takes up a lot of real estate, as does the Lex of it all. But there are some pivotal Clark scenes. Now, in an ideal world, would it have been great to have gotten Man of Steel 2 before this movie? Yes. And I think that the 18-month gap in between those first two movies, it's like it begs for the movie that would have come in between. But this is the hand that everyone was dealt. And, David Goyer, the screenwriter, he talked about how Warner's really wanted to catch up to the MCU. And so I think you see the effects of that in the title and in the inclusion of those video files that Bruce steals from Lex and then shares with Diana of the other future Justice Leaguers.
Right.
And I know those have been criticized, I think, a fair amount for feeling shoehorned in. And I myself have used the phrase short-circuiting the world-building process in this movie. But honestly, in rewatching it, I didn't bump up against them all that much, to be honest. It's really only a couple of minutes. And these were characters or actors that Snyder cast for the Justice League movies that he was planning to make. So it wasn't just like, oh, hey, there's this other movie you have nothing to do with, but we want some cameos in here. It was building towards the larger picture. And was it a little bit of a shortcut? I can't really dispute that, but I don't know. It didn't take me out of it. And I felt relatively not that intrusive. What about you?
No, I mean, I didn't mind it. Like, I like when Barry came out because that was like, oh shit, like, don't trust him. You were right. And then we realized that if you put that in with the Justice League final scene, that was supposed to go somewhere else. So maybe we tell this story, maybe we tell the other story. I didn't mind seeing everybody do it. I thought it was cool. Especially when like the film starts to roll and shit, where like everyone's stuff comes. I was like, it is really cool, man. I love seeing Diana. Like, I thought that was the best way to bring her in because she was about to leave. She's like, oh shit, all this stuff's going on. Man, look, it ain't got nothing to do with me. I'm going to leave. But then we see them all in the end. Like, again, that picture was like my wallpaper for a while of like them in like that flying V, dude, and like the fucking Mighty Ducks flying V and shit. Like, it was such a big deal. I do think that you try to tell way too much story with too many characters that you needed to expand on, right? You needed a lot of Lex in it. You needed a lot of Superman. You needed a lot of Batman, and you only had like this much time. I think overall it should have been either two movies or you should have switched the order. But like I said, when you think you're playing catch up and you're not, when you think you're in a competition, which you're not, just make a good movie. I think a lot of that suffered because of it.
Yeah.
So no, I didn't care about seeing everybody else. I was like, this is awesome. Because you knew they were coming anyway. So give me a little bit. That's all right. Tease me.
Yeah. It's funny too, even the nightmare sequence where Bruce has this vision of the future. I'm sure folks are well familiar with this. I forgot how short it was when it came on. I clocked the time because I was like, how long is the sequence? It's like 5 minutes. I think in my head, I always thought, oh, it's like, it takes up so much space in this movie, but it's only a few minutes. And I think it's setting up this larger story that Snyder wanted to tell. But I think in terms of this specific movie, I think it was like that other domino that needed to fall. Like there was a lot of fuel in terms of Bruce's rage, but I think you needed kind of one more inciting incident, and this vision and Barry's warning of, you were right to fear him. I think that was kind of like the next little piece that needed to fall into place to really just kind of solidify Bruce's position. So I do think it actually served a purpose beyond just teasing what's to come. I think that was a big part of it, but I think that wasn't all of it. And so I think its place in this movie was justified. I don't fault the movie for it.
I don't think he should have woke up twice. Like, why make it a dream twice? Like, why see it and then have him wake up again? Just have him fucking see it, man. And then have like Alfred call downstairs, be like, hey, like there was an electro shot. Like, is everything okay? And he's just like, I don't know. Like, you know what I'm saying? You could have did it like that. Like, I don't like dream sequences as it is. I think it's a really weak Deus Ex Machina. But in this situation, you knew it was going to happen. Like, why did you have him wake up again? Like, it wasn't a reoccurring dream. He had it right there. So the double wake up, that to me, I was like, nah, that ruined it for me like a lot, only because it's like, why? Like, why would you do that? Like, are you saying it is a reoccurring dream and he wakes up from it in the same way every time? But I think there's not enough of that to show us that that's happened. Or, you know what I'm saying? Because he woke up and he wasn't like, again, or whatever. You know what I'm saying? I don't think you need to wake him up the second time. Once, fine. Or not at all is fine. And he realized, like, holy shit, like this got way bigger, or this is way bigger than we thought it was before. I didn't like the double wake up. I wasn't a fan of that. I'd say just leave it in and let it rock.
Fair enough. But as far as those Clark scenes, because they're, again, really a few key scenes, but I think they go a long way, and they're some of my favorite moments in the movie. So sort of a two-parter with Martha Kent, where Clark is watching all of this news footage, questioning him, doubting him, his place in the world. And like the first thing he does is he calls Martha, and, they have that brief chat, and he asks, why didn't Dad ever leave Kansas? But then as Superman, when he flies to the farm and they have that brief chat outside, and I feel like this doesn't rise to the level of Jonathan's talk with Clark in Man of Steel, and maybe he should have let the kids in the bus drown. But I feel like this is another scene that, I don't know, maybe gets misread sometimes, where she's like, be their angel, be their monument, be whatever they need you to be, or be none of it.
None of it. I love that.
You don't owe the world a thing. You never did. And again, I think maybe sometimes that gets misread as
her being mean
or discouraging, or whatever you want to call it. But I think
I think she's looking out for her kid, man. She's
looking out for her kid. And I think even beyond that, it ties into the whole theme with these movies about it being Clark's choice.
Yeah.
Like he doesn't serve as Superman because he owes the world. It's because he chooses to. And Jonathan Kent died. Like he gave his life in order to give Clark the chance to make that choice. He bought him the time to go on that journey of self-discovery so that when the time came, he could choose to stand in front of the world or not. And he's made that choice.
People had a fucking problem with that too, because they didn't realize the deeper meaning behind it. But like I said, I guess that's asking for too much.
But so here, again, I think that's what this speaks to. And so I like this scene a lot. I don't look at this as undermining what we consider, Martha or the Kents generally to be. I really like that moment between the two of them outside.
But like, that's what, like, I love that, because she's like, dude, you don't like, and she's right. She's like, you don't owe, and like, you're doing this because you want to do it, which means do it however you see fit, or do none of it. Like, just do what makes you happy.
Let's talk about the Capitol bombing and the aftermath, because there's that scene with Lois out on the balcony. And we're speaking of the Capitol bombing. I mean, this is yet another instance of Lex pulling the strings, manipulating this guy, Wallace, who lost his legs. And then, of course, Lex introduces himself to Wallace and sets him up with this advanced wheelchair that, of course, he
has a bomb strapped to it.
A bomb in it, which goes off and takes out Senator Finch, Holly Hunter's character, who's been leading these Senate hearings. Also takes out Mercy.
Yeah.
He killed poor Mercy.
Which, by the way, she looks great. Like, comic book wise, I'm like, God damn, like that's a fucking good one.
Yeah. Side note, and this has been, such a part of these conversations when we talk about the real world setting of these movies, and how I think it's actually, as much as you want to say like, oh, it's dark, it's ultimately, I think, a pretty like optimistic view of what it would actually be like if this figure existed. And especially regardless of where you fall politically, even just in this sense, and just what Senator Finch puts forth, this notion that Superman shouldn't act unilaterally, right? Like, that's her problem. It's not that he's engaging in world affairs. It's that he's doing it of his own accord. He's not following anyone's orders.
Yeah.
And again, I just think about our leaders, our system of government, our current situation, and the idea of placing the power of Superman in any of their hands would be insane to me.
Yeah.
So again, just that whole notion and that angle is really interesting. And again, I think what you get here is a pretty rosy view, all things considered, of like how it would actually play out, right?
Yeah. If a Superman-like archetype came down today, they'd want to cut him open, just like they almost did in American Alien. They want to figure out what it is. They'd want to weaponize him. No one would trust him. They wouldn't. It doesn't matter what kind of good deeds he did, because we have shit floating around in our heads like, well, is he playing the long game? We're a doubtful people, man. Like, we don't want, like, if someone says something nice to us these days, we assume that they want something. We don't even take it as a compliment. Now you got this guy in that quote being like, well, what if he's just nice, like trying to do nice stuff? And like the talking head shit all over that. Like, one guy was like, yeah, what if he's just a genuinely good dude? We don't believe they exist. So in a world like this, where you have that character, yeah, I mean, of course, no one's going to like him. They're going to like him when he does something for them. And then as soon as he doesn't, he's going to become vilified. And that's kind of what we see in like the microcosm of the movie and shit. Like, he can't be everywhere at once, man. He can't. And when he goes and saves somebody across town and doesn't save you, all of a sudden you're ripping down your posters, fuck him and blah, blah, blah. Like, of course you're going to do that. So that's why it worked, because it's today. We're just all over the place, man. But if someone floated down and was like, I'm here to help, 20% of the population would believe him. And then they'd get infected by their friends who are like, yeah, but I saw him do this. And all of a sudden be that dude, he'd fly away, be like, fuck you guys. You know what I'm saying? Like, we'd run Superman right out of town. He
would be claimed by some groups, denounced or disavowed. He would be outright denied. People would claim that he doesn't exist or he doesn't do these things. A couple of things about the Capitol scene. One is, and this is small, but I think it says a lot, when Superman is walking in, right, and he's holding the little gate, right, and moving it into position. You just feel the power within him.
Oh God,
and
just so good.
You recognize like what restraint it takes to just place that as gently as he does.
Yep.
And that's the other thing with this movie, that it's not until you get to the kryptonite part of the battle with Batman, and then of course the fight with Doomsday, where there's ever really even a test of his power. That's what I think this movie is so fascinating, because it's still a truly compelling story, because it's not about the powers or challenging him in that way. Right. It really is more of this ideological, philosophical question. So that little moment really stood out a lot. The other is what I was getting at before, where I said, again, it feels like a very conscious choice to not have him speak, to have the bomb go off before he can say anything.
Yep.
The only thing that you really hear the character say about these proceedings is in that bathroom scene before he hops in the tub with Lois, talking about the aftermath of Africa and the fact that he intervened, and the fact that you have this alleged witness claiming that he killed these people. And he's like, well, of course I didn't kill those people. And of course I would save you. Yeah. So you do have him expressing, kind of his view generally on it. And of course it's very simple and matter of fact, because that's the truth. Do you have, like, what do you think Superman would have said if the bomb didn't go off and he had a moment to express himself?
Oh man, scene? Dude, you're asking, like, look, you should be answering that fucking question. I mean, like, I think from my limited, which now growing because of you giving me all these awesome things to read. I think he'd be like, look, you guys are going to pin whatever you want. Like, I can't, anything I try to do to prove that it wasn't me, you're just going to say that it was me anyway. I'm going to continue what I'm doing, which is for the betterment of people. In the best way I know how. Like, I'm still trying to figure this out. Like, I think the honesty would spill out. Like, man, look, I got here. I didn't know what was going on. As the years went by, I knew less and less. And then when I met these people, it got way more complicated, because all I'm trying to do, like we just said, was to be a good person. And everywhere I turn, I'm being told that's not the way to do it, or I'm bad or whatever. So, like, what do you want me to do to prove to you that I'm good it's not going to matter, because you already had set in your head that I'm this person. So after this is over, say whatever you want, post whatever you want, write whatever you want. I'm going to go do my job because you want me to prove something to you that you don't even want to listen to. Like, I think that's the only thing he can say. Like, what else is he going to say?
I think it would be that. I think it would be something along the lines of what he said to Swanwick at the end of Man of Steel, where he's like, I'm here to help, but it has to be on my terms. I think the my terms angle is probably something he would have hit on. But the other aspect here that's important that we didn't get to see because of the bomb is what would Finch have said? Because the senator learned right before this that this woman from Africa, this witness who claimed that Superman murdered all of these people, came forward and revealed that Lex had actually paid her to spin this story. So, and watching the movie, you get the sense that the senator, though,
I don't think she even needed that, though. She didn't seem like she was a fan from she didn't say fan from the beginning.
Well, but that Finch wasn't a fan of Superman.
Yeah.
Well, I don't disagree. I mean, yes, ostensibly she's an antagonist to Superman, but I don't. That's the thing about this movie that I think is really interesting is that everyone has an independent agenda that then Lex further instigates and manipulates, but everyone has their own perspective. And my view on the senator, I don't know. I like to think I give her the benefit of the doubt that she had the scruples that she would have brought forth the truth. So,
yeah.
And I could be totally wrong. So I don't know. It would have been interesting to see how that could have unfolded, but we don't get that because instead the bomb goes off. And I feel like this is another moment that gets misread because I'm watching this, and again, I feel like some of the criticism, not that we want to dwell on that, but I feel like some of the criticism of this is that Superman comes across as kind of unfeeling during this sequence. And I'm watching this scene and you're seeing it as he's experiencing it, right? Where he's just in the midst of this totally unfazed physically. But I feel like you see such pain. Like he feels the loss of these people, the fact that he was unable to save them, and the fact ultimately, and this feeds into the next scene with Lois, that these people died because of his existence.
Yeah.
And I feel like you see that on his face in that scene. I think ultimately Clark's struggle in this movie to try to be a force for good amidst all of the doubting and the questioning and the machinations against him. And what we see in this specific scene, a horrendous act of violence that he's engulfed in this explosion that claims the lives of all of these people.
Yeah. And he's left to stand there like, oh my God. Because he knew it was going to be on him.
Right. And just by virtue of his existence, which again ties back with the prior movie. And when we get to the end of the movie, not to jump ahead, but Lex has a great line where he's like, I don't hate the sinner. I hate the sin.
Yeah.
And yours, my friend, is existing.
Yeah.
Just this notion of his very presence in the world. And
I think that's how he thinks everyone thinks at this point. And I'm saying, like, I can't do right by anybody. So you're right.
Right. Because it's like, regardless of how people are perceiving him, whether they're worshiping him or condemning him, very few, not no one, right? But very few seem to be seeing him as he is for who he is and what he's trying to do. One of the things, like I said, I don't want to harp on the differences between the cuts, but one of the things, my God, they really did the theatrical cut a disservice, because I do remember in that theatrical cut after the explosion, either he's just gone or you just see him fly away.
Yeah.
And then you watch the Ultimate Edition and there's this whole sequence of him bringing survivors out and trying to help. And then eventually he flies away as kind of the toll of all of this weighs on him.
Yeah.
And of course, still surrounded by all the protesters on both sides. So again, man, like that little bit of connective tissue was really crucial here, because look, in fairness, you watch the theatrical cut, there's this huge explosion and he's just gone.
Yeah.
It's not the best look. So I was happy to see that piece there.
And you're like, well, that's what you get when you treat someone like shit. Like, his patience is only going to go so far. He's not going to turn on people, but his patience is only going to go so far to be like, I'm not going to let people talk to me like that anymore, which is why I have a place that no one else can get to, because, I got to deal with this shit every day.
That leads to that balcony scene with Lois, where I think, you really see him at probably his lowest point in terms of spirit after all of this. And this conversation between them where he expresses that, well, practically speaking, that he didn't see the bomb and he's afraid it's because he wasn't looking. Now, of course,
Right.
Lois will later learn that it was lead lined and he couldn't have seen it. But in that moment, it's like, did this escape my sight? And not to sound like Green Lantern, but then this notion about Superman was never real. He was just the dream of a farmer from Kansas, and I've been righting wrongs for a ghost. And she's like, this is all that farmer's dream. And this was one of the scenes that really this one really got me in the heart. It was like, that farmer's dream is all that some people have. And she touches the crest, and he's like, this means something.
Yeah.
And we get this moment where he's like, it did on my world. My world doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah.
So he flies away. But it's such a profound moment because, again, in terms of what this movie is seeding, you have that talk about his world. And then the moment with Jonathan that I want to talk about, where he talks about Martha being his world. And then, of course, culminating in him telling Lois, this is my world. You are my world. So again, I just like, I like how all of this ties together. But yeah, I mean, like a heartbreaking scene between the two of them at that point.
Yeah. It's kind of like, and again, I'm only saying it because we just read it. When the roles flip in American Alien and she's talking to him the second time in the diner, and he's like, I don't understand what people want me to do. Like, you can't just do good deeds. And she's like, no, man, you changed my mind. Like he is just here to be a good person. So I like how we see that where like, he's like, I'm going to do all this good stuff. And she's like, dude, you got to understand, like, you're bigger than what they think, right? They're going to think this way, but like that crest and like who you are and like how you were raised, that's bigger than all of this shit. Because at the end of the day, they're going to thank you for being there. Let them say whatever they want, man. That one lady who you pretty much saved her whole family from a flood, like that should take you into the next, like, don't worry about all this little shit, man. Like you're one dude, like you're a Superman, but you're one person. You're one person. Like that's got to mean something.
And I think that sort of gets at the heart of the scene with Jonathan. So Clark retreats, right? He doesn't have a fortress of solitude in this iteration, but he goes up north in the snow, trekking along there, and comes upon this vision of Jonathan. I've seen some folks kind of discussing whether exactly what this was. Was it a ghost? Was it just something he was imagining? I take it to be a memory. That's kind of my interpretation. Like this was a conversation they had at some point, and that's what he's remembering in this moment, where Jonathan tells the story about when he was a kid and there was a flood, and he and his father like worked through the night and they diverted it. And he was hailed as a hero, and his grandmother baked him a cake. But unknowingly, they had diverted the water to the Lang farm, and the horses drowned. Now, before we talk about the ultimate meaning of the scene, did you notice how many horses are in this movie?
No.
And that's the beauty of coming back.
Oh, but
to
the
this
one
stuff.
is actually, you know what's strange? When Bruce is running into the smoke, and you see the one lone horse running away. You know what, dude? I never picked up on that. Holy shit.
There's the lone horse there. In the African desert, the CIA operatives who are...
Oh, they're all on... That's right. He gives them the finger. Yeah.
They're on horseback. Outside the Capitol, when the bomb goes off, the horse shrieks back. And you have this story...
Oh, nice work, dude.
And you have this story. I was watching it, and, the horse in the smoke in Metropolis at the beginning, that always stood out to me. And I was like, but I never... kind of followed that thread. And this time watching it, I was like, oh, there's like a lot of horse.
Yeah.
So
equestrian stuff.
Really a theme here. I mean, what it all means, I don't know. I welcome people's thoughts on this. I was looking, I found a Reddit thread that had this whole breakdown talking about representing like either death or loss of control.
Yeah.
And in those scenes, I
it
think
could be
that
the colors of them
because
the first one that runs by Bruce is white. And if you know the Man in Black song, and I heard, as it were, and the horse name is, and it's the pale horse and shit, and it's leaving the scene. It was almost like death did its job and now it's leaving, because you could have showed anything. Instead, you have this image of this white horse. I don't remember the rest of the colors and shit, but I mean, if we're going to talk about that, that's got to be what that one meant, dude. It's a pale horse, literally riding away.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
So you've got that whole theme going on here too. But what's your take on what Jonathan says to him?
Dude, it's got to be like, hey, man, you're going to help something over here, and something's always going to go wrong over here. And if it's your fault, it's the butterfly effect at that point, man. Like, yeah, you can help these people, but some shit is always going to go wrong over here. Like, but you didn't know that was going to happen. So if you save this thing over here and this happened because of that action, your intention wasn't to make that happen. Your intention was to help this. This just happened because of that. But if you didn't do the first one, something was going to happen anyway. You can only do as much as you can do. So I think that dude, that's got to be it. Like, it's so in your face and shit. Like, I don't think there has to be a deeper meaning to that one, man. I think that one's pretty spot on.
I think definitely the notion of unintended consequences, right?
Yeah.
That you can do something and it can have this effect, and you can have the best intentions in the world, but it can still have these consequences. I think that's totally the heart of it. But the other thing too, that I always kind of circle back to is when he talks about, the grandmother baking him a cake, and just this idea that you can be viewed by people in different ways. Yeah. Like in that moment for him as a kid, to his family, he was a hero, but to the Langs, whose horses drowned, probably anything but, right?
Yeah. It's weird. So there's a guy outside the McDonald's in Newark. Every time I see him, talk to him a little bit, homeless guy, trying to give him some money and shit like that. Like one day it was really cold. I gave him $10 and shit, and we just started talking and stuff like that. I never asked him about his past. Like, they want just to be treated well. So I gave him a little something, right? Now, if he goes, he always goes inside and buys something. Say I give him money and he goes and picks up drugs, right? And dies, right? I gave him the money because I wanted to do something good for him. What he chose to do with it afterwards, that's not on me. Like, I might have gave him the money, but that wasn't the intent, right? So where does it stop? Is it your intention of what you do? Not like these people that film themselves giving, money to homeless. So look what I'm doing. Like, because then that's bullshit. But if you do that and something happens because of that, that's not on you, man. Like, you did your thing. Like, unfortunately, I went to go visit an old student in the hospital. He got into a car accident. It killed his 13-year-old cousin, right? He was giving him a ride home. Now, my kid is like, it's my fault because I'm the one who picked him up to bring him home. No, it's the fault of the person that blew through a fucking stop sign and ripped your car in half. You were trying to do something nice. So it's always like, when you do something nice, if it causes something afterwards that is now out of your control, you didn't like set into this grand thing. Like, you just try to do something nice, man. You got to treat it as these little things. So I think it is the unintended consequence thing, man. Like, it has to be. Like, the whole movie pretty much revolves around that anyway.
Yeah, no, for sure. I think I keep coming back to this action, right? Like, it's, you try to do, essentially you try to do the right thing, and it might have these consequences, and you might be seen by some as a hero and a villain by others, but It's still the action that has to guide you.
And what did Martha say? You can do it or not do anything at all, but it's got to be your choice.
Yeah.
So whatever you do is the action that you take because you felt that it's what you needed to do, or you could do nothing.
Right.
But I have a tendency to always look back at the times I could have did something and didn't, more than I look at the times when I did something nice and something else bad happened. So I feel better when I do something. If something happens from it, of course I feel bad, but I still feel good that I did something to help somebody else. So I think a lot of the themes revolve around that, where it's like, even fighting Batman to a point kind of follows the same thing, right? And getting involved in stuff. I think it all kind of revolves around that theme, which is awesome. But now I got to review it for the horses again. I want to see the color of the horses.
Right. Now, by the time Clark gets back, he's there to save Lois from Lex, who's tossed her off the roof. Now, let's talk about Lex here.
Hate him.
A few still?
Yeah. I don't like everyone's just done a Gene Hackman impression, except for from what I understand, which can't believe I'm going to admit this right here.
You've never seen
Probably
Smallville?
going to start watching Smallville. I can't believe it's gotten to that point. But from what I understand, he was really good. And I like the new guy that they got to play him in the Superman was called Legacy, not called. I like that dude. I like him. He's got the look. He's got the eyebrows for it and shit like that. I don't like. Is it just me, or maybe it's because of my random viewing of it? Does Lex even have? Is he just like a bad foil? Like what is he doing? Like what's the ultimate goal here? Like, is it just to test the limits? Is he doing it because he wants to see them fight? Like, I'm just like, what the fuck is going on with maybe it's because the two versions have like fucked me up, but like, why are you even doing it in the first place?
So I feel like the biggest journey I've had with this movie has been with Lex. I went in like pretty skeptical of this iteration and Jesse Eisenberg in this role. And even coming out of that first viewing, I was like, he was okay.
Yeah.
But
I like him. He's a good actor. I just didn't like this.
Over time and rewatching it, man, I think I actually really, really like this take. And I know that's still probably not the most popular opinion with this movie, but I think
fucking give it to me, man. Why?
For this film, I think it works. It works beautifully. So
is it because he doesn't quite know what he's doing yet? So this is the best version?
It's not even that. It's he knows exactly what he's doing. Like that's the thing about this that I think is kind of fascinating, where first of all, look, in terms of the overall depiction, I think positioning Lex a la Zuckerberg or someone of that ilk.
Yeah.
But I mean, I think in terms of what we would see today of someone in that role, I felt like the choice of Eisenberg and kind of just the visual representation and his various tics and whatnot, I was okay with that. This also speaks, I think, to the versatility of the character of Lex Luthor, where you can spin him and use him in different ways. And look, for me, my sweet spot, I love them as former friends in Smallville, and it fell apart. This is not that at all, but I think it still works. So like throughout the movie, putting aside all of his plot machinations, you think about what he talks about with people, and he brings in the kryptonite and he tries to sell this idea to the government, sell them on this idea of a silver bullet because we need this deterrent. So that kind of falls in line with what
that's fine.
With what we've seen of Lex before, of needing to protect the world. But that's not what this is about. Like that's what he says. He also talks a lot about his father and speaks about him in fairly, positive terms to people throughout the movie, that he came from Germany, came from nothing. Even in the scene at the benefit for the library where Lex is giving that toast, it's like in the background where while Bruce is off doing what he's doing, but you hear Lex talk about my father couldn't afford books. He's always talking about his father. When the senator visits the mansion, he's talking about, I kept everything just like, maybe if I leave like this, dad will come back, right?
Yeah. And that should be upside down. That was a great part.
So that's what he's saying to people. But then you get to that rooftop scene, that confrontation between Lex and Superman. And he talks about how he learned long ago that if God is all powerful, he cannot be all good. If he is all good, he cannot be all powerful. Why? Because no one saved him from, quote, daddy's fists and abominations.
Yeah.
So the father he's talked about to people, right, clearly was a very different man behind closed doors and subjected him to who knows exactly what kind of abuse. I think the abomination speaks to something. I think we're talking a pretty dark experience that he had as a child. And this idea that no one was there to save him, and this takeaway that he has about what God is and isn't. And then as an adult, he sees this being from another world hailed as a god.
But he wasn't here for them, because then it just makes him.
No, but I think, but for Lex, like the idea of a god, of people worshiping Superman as a god, is so antithetical to him, because he knows that there's no God who could be all powerful and all good.
Right.
And if people are seeing you as all powerful and all good, I need to bring you down to earth and dirty you up and make people see what I learned as a child when no God came to save me.
So then I can't even treat him as an adult then at that point, just based on his actions, the way he does things, the basketball, which we actually saw in a comic, right? He's got this basketball court and stuff like that. I think he's brilliant. I also think he's a psycho. And I think that this is just a person. He's a very, 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 very smart person who's holding a grudge against someone who wasn't their fault. He's just projecting whatever happened and what he thinks should have happened, because in the end, he really falls apart. Like, he wasn't in his rights that, like, now he's going to set up this Doomsday creature. And he's like, he doesn't know when that thing was going to stop. As far as I'm concerned, based on what you just said, he didn't care if the thing ripped the fucking world apart at that point, because he had lost. If you actually look at the line of everything he did, he lost every time, right? He tries to get this, it doesn't work. He tries to do this, he tries to get them to kill each other, it doesn't work. He was so frustrated at the end, he was just like, fuck everything. Let's just let's unleash this thing and see what happens. So I think it was frustration, it was projection, and I think ultimately it was a complete mental breakdown. And if I look at it from that lens, with the ticks and the uncertainty and the obvious, like, I'm not good enough, so I have to build this thing on my dad that, like, he thought I was. I think it just turns him into more of like a Joker archetype than a Lex Luthor archetype. Like, having someone break down that much and ultimately just be like, fuck it, then the chaos reign. I like it to think more of it like that. So you kind of change my mind. If I now review it through that lens and just watch the slow decline of someone who always wins, but didn't when he was young. And now he's got like this monumental rise to fame. And then he's just taking L after L with dealing with these two. Yeah, I think I appreciate that a little bit more.
But is he taking L after L? Like, that's the thing. He succeeds in getting the two of these guys face to face in what could very well be a battle to the death. And it ends up not being,
but
right?
It's not, right?
It's not. And so, yes, that's when things turn. And that's when, yes, I think he probably becomes more unhinged. And certainly once he's accessed the ship and he's had that whole experience and he
threw Lois Lane off a roof knowing that he was going to come get her. She's also a pretty famous journalist. You don't think that, like, the next day she'd be like, hey, Lex Luthor throw me off a fucking roof because he's a psychopath? Like, it's got to be cameras somewhere. I think at that point he just wanted what he wanted, and that's what he wanted.
But that's the thing. But I feel, and I to your point, like, you know, almost Joker like. Maybe as you were saying that, I was like, I don't know that I see that, but maybe to an extent I do, because I think with Lex, I don't think this was a Lex whose aims were as I don't know, for lack of a better word, practical or tangible in the way they are in other types of stories. I think this was this very fundamental idea of, you cannot be seen as a god, and I am going to bring you down.
Right. But if he's still the injured boy, like, first of all, the entire theme of this is just trauma. Right. And I think that's where a lot of people missed, right? Like, in every character that we see, even from the guy who gets branded, who knows he's going into a death sentence and stuff, just trauma all over the place. And I know he's Lex Luthor, but if you're going to say that, why not observe him for longer? Why go right for this guy needs to die? Is it because you hold a grudge? Because if you hold a grudge, then I can see it. But
wait, a grudge for what though?
For a god not saving him when he was getting beat up and worse by his dad. So if you're going to begrudge this guy who's genuinely trying to do all good, why would you try to bring him down a peg then? Right? Like, if so if he's gotten in his mind, like, God wasn't there to save me, so I don't want him to be there to save these other people, that it doesn't seem like the first move. Like, if he is saving other people, wouldn't you want that? Unless you have this grudge and you're stomping your feet like a child. Because at that point, well, I couldn't get saved, so fuck everyone else, which, I mean, I guess is kind of a Lex Luthor thing. I don't know.
I think, so here's the thing.
I'm trying to make sense of it in my head.
No,
it's just not.
It's very interesting. I think this is interesting. Hopefully the audience does as well. But I think that, yeah, it would have been great if, like, so Lex comes to this conclusion that God is not all good and all powerful.
Right.
It would be great if he saw Clark out, and he knows, right, he figures out that Bruce is Batman and Clark is, like, he's ahead of everybody.
Yeah.
It'd be great if he saw Clark performing his miracles. And I don't know, if he saw something in what Superman was doing and realized, oh, I was wrong, right? That would have been one thing, that some being like this actually does exist out there, and he can be there for other people in a way that, quote unquote, God was not there for me.
Right.
But, like, he's Lex Luthor. Like, he would never, I think that idea that he was wrong and that there's something out there that exists that he thought didn't, I think that's so antithetical to him. And that's why I think that's not even
and you just can't have
like,
that.
I don't think he could even entertain that. It's like, you're holding him up as this all powerful, all good. That cannot be. And I am going to show you.
Which, actually, if you think about it, it doesn't matter how many L's he takes along the way, because the piece that I'm just putting together now is he was right. Because if it was supposed to play out like it was, when he gets the anti-life equation, he's not all fucking good. He's all powerful, but he's not all good. And we saw that in the nightmare scene. So he's like, no, you can't be all these things. Superman's trying to prove that he is, but ultimately, with all of the sneak peeks into what it is, it doesn't matter if he lost the whole fucking movie. Ultimately, he might not have seen his rightness come to fruition, But I mean, I guess he was to a certain extent.
Yeah, but I mean, like what I kind of, and this took multiple viewings, and especially that rooftop scene where I don't know, I just came to appreciate how fundamental Lex's objectives were, or elemental. Like they went beyond what I think we typically see. And I don't know, I found it fascinating. And so he goads the two of these guys into a fight. And we get this moment where, of course, Clark learns that Lex has taken Martha, and Clark has to go kill Batman, right? And bring Lex the body in order to save Martha. And there's that exchange between Lois and Clark as Clark flies away, and he's like, no one stays good in this world.
Yeah.
And that leads to this confrontation, the big battle that this whole thing has been building towards, or one of the big battles, because we have a couple more levels to go here. But that battle between Batman and Superman, one of the things that, I don't know, I'm mixed on this. I'm curious to get your take. When Clark shows up and they're face to face, to his credit, Clark tries to explain and is
that's what I was going to get to.
Like
so he says not everyone's good in this world. I don't think he means him. I think he means Lex. And that's why he didn't just go over there and fucking decimate him. Like we always bring up, if I wanted it, you'd be dead already.
Yeah.
Like I'm here to talk. Yep. Batman was the only one that just wasn't listening to shit.
But here's what I want to ask you. Because so he gets there, he starts to try to explain, and then he's hit with the sonics. He's riddled with all the bullets. So he stopped. But then, and this is the most interesting part of this, there's a decent stretch there before Bruce hits him with the kryptonite, where Clark is just like throwing him around, like multiple throws.
Yeah.
And I guess you could argue, well, I don't know, he's just trying to subdue Bruce first and diffuse the situation before trying to talk again. Or is there an argument to be made? And I don't think this is necessarily a bad thing if it's the case, because I think the movie earns it. Is there a part of him who's just like genuinely fed up at this point?
So I think it's both. Like I was going to say about the end of Man of Steel and about the fight, but it also works here. If you're going and you're trying to explain something to somebody and they keep swinging on you, you're going to try to subdue him like that. If you got something to say and you're trying to explain something, you're not going to start swinging. You will try and do things to slow said person down. But the whole time he was like, dude, like you got it. Like, give me a second and I will fucking explain it. And the rapid fire events of how Bruce did not let that happen means, okay, if I throw him around a little bit, especially in that big thing, he's going to get tired. Right. So maybe it'll give me my opportunity to say something. And I think that being in that situation before, where like, you know, someone's talking shit, someone else talking shit, someone come looking for you because no one's really listening. You know, you didn't do it. They think you did. And it's just like, look, man, look, swing on me. That's fine. I'm going to put you down, but we're going to have this fucking conversation. So I think it's a mixture of both. Like, and again, he closes the thing gingerly, right? What if he's just like, I don't know, the thing's really heavy. How hard am I going to fucking throw this guy? Like, I don't want to kill him, but I want to put him in a position where I can actually stop him and talk to him. Could he just put his foot on his chest? Yeah, probably. But I don't think he wants to meet Batman like that. I think in this situation, if you're going to have an agreement with someone, you got to meet him face to face. And unfortunately, the only time that happened is when fucking Batman shoots him with when Batman shoots him with kryptonite.
I got to tell you, man, this fight was brutal to watch.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it was
also amazing. It was amazing.
Look, and you see the Dark Knight Returns influence in full effect here.
Oh, yeah.
We'll talk more about that in a little bit. but yeah, I mean, the fight it's so brutal. And, you know, to see Clark experiencing the effects of kryptonite, right, and not knowing what he's dealing with, and to see him on the ropes initially, but then to see him recover, and especially the scene where
with
Batman's
the fist going back and forth,
fist in the face, like
and it just stops moving.
But when we get to the point,
fucking part was awesome,
where Bruce hits him with it again, and hoists him up and grabs him by the hair and hoists him up and throws him over the ledge, and when he lands, man, you feel it, and when he rips the sink. Yeah, there are parts of this that are like really tough to stomach. Yeah. And you know, one of the things that made me more okay with it, I remember watching behind the scenes footage where they showed how they did that, and the sink was like styrofoam, and then you know, not that I thought it was real, but I'm just saying, like, seeing how they did it, I'm like, okay, because watching, like, it's loving this character so much is like hard to see him. And we talked about this when we covered Superman Returns. not the most stellar entry in the Superman canon, but it has its value. It has its moments. And when we have Superman on the rock, the kryptonite rock in the movie, and Lex's henchmen are they're beating him. It's hard to watch. And so you see that here. And of course that brings us to the Martha moment. Coming out the other side of the Martha moment, one of the bits here that, man, this was another one that got me, when Bruce has had his awakening and he offers to help, right? Because Superman is needed at the ship site because weird stuff is going on. And he says, I make you a promise, Martha won't die tonight. Mm-hmm. And it's like, again, the trauma, like that, this little boy, like this is his opportunity now to save one of Martha. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Oh man.
Yep. That's why, man, if you look at it through that lens and knowing what he said afterwards, you should get misty. Like for real, like knowing that was the gut punch to stop him. And then he didn't know what he was going into. So technically Batman was like, no, I'm going to do this. He didn't know what the fuck he was walking into, but he was like, no, nothing's going to happen. Yeah. I'll promise you that shit. Because this was his opportunity to save a Martha, who's also a mom to a fucking boy, basically, who's just trying to do the right thing or enjoy a movie. You know? And then we get, let's face it, the best on-screen Batman fight of fucking all time. That movie makes me want to fight people. And I gave that up a long time. That shit was so insanely well done that I'm just like, dude, I honestly could have watched 15 more minutes of just that. The box flipping over his head. I was like, this is fucking awesome.
Yeah, the warehouse scene is really something. I want to bring up something. I feel like someone has said this to me, a guest who's been on the show either on or off mic, and I don't remember, so forgive me. But this whole business about Lex wanting to force Superman to kill. Yeah. Superman has already killed. He killed Zod.
Yeah.
So, but part of it is you don't know exactly what the public knows about what happened, though presumably they know that Zod is dead and the body's in the hands of the government. So I don't imagine that the outcome of the battle with Zod and Superman's role in it is a secret per se. There's also an argument Zod was this alien combatant, the clear antagonist.
Yeah, he's also bad. Yeah.
He's bad, but I mean, I don't know. Batman that walks a line as far as how the public perceives him, but he walks human, line, I suppose.
Yeah. He's like, I understand that Clark was like, well, he only preys on the poor. Meanwhile, that's who he's helping. But like Clark's doing his job as a journalist to try and figure that out. He doesn't know it right away. So I think watching Superman kill another superpowered alien, that's not a win for Lex. Killing a fucking man who is also trying to do good in his own way, I think that's the win.
Yeah, and I also think, again, we don't know what if any the public's reaction was to Superman killing Zod, but whatever it was, enough time has passed now, and enough people have come to view him as a savior. So regardless of what happened before, Lex has this hurdle that he feels he needs to overcome. Right. Now, something happens in this warehouse fight that points to the recent interview that Snyder gave and another patron question as well. Because there's a scene where he busts through the wall.
Yeah.
Right? And you have Lex's guy pointing the gun at Martha. And he says, I'll do it. And Bruce, of course, says, I believe you. And what does he do? Right? He shoots this guy's fuel tank.
Yeah.
Killing him. Yeah. And this is not the only life that Batman takes in the course of this movie. Numerous people clearly die, particularly, I guess maybe the most blatant example is when he's stealing or trying to steal the kryptonite earlier in the movie. This is something that has been a bone of contention for a lot of people. I think generally Batfleck was well received, but the use of guns and more specifically the taking of lives in this film, I know has been a frustration for a lot of fans, particularly, hardcore Batman fans. Snyder just addressed this, but before I get to that, I mean, is that something that you had any issues with either then or now over the course of watching this movie?
To me, he shot a fucking a thing that blew up. Okay. He shot a guy's gas tank, didn't shoot him, shot the gas tank. So in my opinion, this is the version that he's like, okay, I'm not going to kill someone directly. I'm not going to put a bullet in their head. I don't like guns, right? So I'm not going to do that. But if I shoot this gas tank and he doesn't take it off in time, that's his fucking bad. So is he killing? Are there scenes of death happening because of him? Yes. Is he firing on a group of people? No, there's intimidation. A truck flips over. Hey, man, they died. I guess they should have held on to the wheel better. I like that Batman more because at least he's like, no, I will never shoot somebody. I will not actively take a life and I will not look at somebody like Joe Chill did to my mom, was like, this is how it's going to fucking go down. But if I need to save somebody, I'll shoot your gas tank. I guess you better jump out the fucking window, dude. Like, I like that because then he's not technically doing it, but now it releases some of that pressure of, but why don't you then? Right? So like, I don't mind that. I don't. I actually like this version quite a bit because it stays to the, I'm not going to actively kill, but I'm also not going to save you either.
Well, I talked about this with Bernie last week in the context of Clark killing Zod, where there have been other instances. I mean, I don't want to rehash it, but instances where Superman has killed in the past, sometimes where it's like very specifically part of the story, other times where it's like, well, he's seems responsible for this death, but that's not what the story is about. And so, you know, when does it count and when does it not? All that to say that I think there are a couple of things going on here. For me personally, looking at Batman's actions in this movie, I didn't really have an issue with it, only because more than anything else, I see this as a Batman unhinged because of what he has experienced in the opening of this movie and that sense of feeling powerless. Like, we don't have enough of the backstory here to really know for sure, but I think based on Alfred's reactions to him during the course of this movie, I get the sense that this more brutal, lethal approach is more recent and is a product of this very single-minded quest that he's on. So this is a Batman who's now making exceptions, acting out in of different character, ways. Right? Uh-huh. And one of the things with both Superman and Batman in this series of films that I know people have issues with, but they provided places for the characters to go and a journey for them to go on. Because you watch Batman, and by the time he gets to the end of this movie and he's making this promise that, you know, I failed him in life, but I won't fail him in death, and I'm going to put this team together. And then you see he becomes the man of faith in Justice League, right? So he has this whole
of hope, dude, of hope, because it is,
So like he has this whole turn. So I think where we start with him here, it gives him a place to go, and it's informed by what you see at the beginning of that movie. So I don't necessarily take it that he was doing that before, and I don't necessarily take it that he does it or would do it after, per se.
Yeah.
But I think where this gets, this gets a little even more interesting is specifically that scene with shooting the gas tank. I do put more on him for that. Like, I get where you're saying, like, oh, I just shot the tank, but it's like, so this was actually something that Snyder talked about in this Joe Rogan interview. I like to try to keep these episodes as timeless as possible, but I also don't want to ignore what's going on in the real world at the same time. And literally within a day or two of us recording this, Zack Snyder did a 2-hour interview on the Joe Rogan Experience. And of course,
because I didn't hear any of it. So what did he say about that?
Well, so part? The conversation really seemed to focus more on that death in this specific scene that we're talking about. And Snyder cites Dark Knight Returns and claims that the exact thing happens there. And a lot of fans have pushed back on this, claiming that while the setup for the scene is nearly identical in the comic, and of course this, Dark Knight Returns, huge inspiration for him, that Batman doesn't actually kill the guy in that. Like, he does fire in the comic, but it hits him in the shoulder or fires behind him. Like, it doesn't kill him. And that the book shortly after that makes a very explicit point in the news commentary that, like, Batman hasn't killed anyone. So it seems like Snyder's read on that scene might be off. We have a patron question that speaks to that, but but in the interview, like, rather than talking about the killing generally, the conversation really seemed to focus more on that specific death. But anyway, this is what Snyder says. He goes, Batman can't kill, right? So Batman can't kill is canon. So I'm like, the first thing I want to do when you say that is I want to see what happens if Batman kills.
Okay.
And Snyder goes on to say, and they go, well, don't put him in a situation where he has to kill someone. I'm like, you're protecting your God in a weird way, right? You're making your God irrelevant if he can't be in that situation. He
Right.
has to now deal with that. If he does do that, what does that mean? What does it tell you? How does he stand up to it? Can he survive that, right? As a god, as your god, can Batman survive that? So here's the thing, I guess. If we were talking more, I don't want to go too far afield with this, but I feel like if we were talking more about the Superman killing of Zod, I understand that argument more. I don't know that that is the best argument here because, again, I go back to that Zod scene and it's like, I feel like it was pretty clear, like he didn't have another choice in that moment. Whereas here, I don't know, he could have shot his hand, he could have shot the floor. Like I don't know. I don't know that this falls into that same category for me.
If you exacerbate the Martha scene and the lack of thought because of the trauma, and then he turns around and he goes, she's not going to die tonight, dude. I promise. If you act in not as a Batman fan, or even worse, a Batboy, which we know who they are, right? You could beat Thanos with the Infinity Gauntlet. We're in a fucking prep time. If you treat him like a person and you actually make him a person in that scene, making a promise to save that person with that name to the person that you just promised that would happen. If it came down to those two, he's breaking that fucking rule in order to make this happen. And you can say that he looks at every angle and he figures shit out. A lot of these motherfuckers saying that have never been in a single fight in their entire lives. Some of them you don't think, you just do, right? You know that you got to protect these people. So this person's got to go down. Hey, look, man, if he goes down in a weird way, that's not my problem. I got to protect these people. Now he's got this woman who shares the name of his mom, who he just is in the throes of this traumatic event. He's made a promise that this person doesn't die. I'm telling you right now, as someone that has been in fucked up situations where fighting has taken place, you're thinking about that promise. You're not thinking about your oath. You're just not. Because you are now getting a second shot at the apple to get rid of the guy who killed your mom, basically.
Sure. You're
not going to let him go. You won't kill him directly. You're not going to look at him in his face and you're going to put a bullet in his face. You're not going to do that. But you are going to be like, you know what? In my current mind, where yes, I'm controlled because I'm Batman, I have about an attosecond to make this decision. That's a decision I'm making. If that makes him flawed, good. He's supposed to be. But if you start saying, well, he shouldn't have did it, then where do you go with the movie? You should have been the fucking shoulder, and then what, you leave him there? Who cares what happens to this guy afterwards? I think you make him human and now full of trauma that he's tried to bury, and he made a promise to somebody because of what just happened. And he didn't kill the dude directly. I think that's the best he could have did in that situation.
I feel like where we differ is like he didn't kill the guy directly, but I mean, basically, I don't know. But
I'm telling you, it's the thought process of I got to get this done by any means necessary. With also this thing in my head that I don't do this thing. I mean,
right. But again,
at that point.
And again, I feel like what the wrinkle here is like this wasn't an isolated incident in this movie. But again, I think in terms of the other deaths that result, we can chalk it up to just where he is in his journey. But so we have a question from one of our patrons, Jan, who says, now this points to Snyder's apparent misreading or misinterpretation of the Dark Knight Returns comic. Okay. Where again, he claims this plays out. And again, the setup is the same, but he claims in the comic, like Batman shoots the guy in the head. And I did take a look at it. It's like, I don't know. Yeah. So Jan says, why do you think Snyder believes that Batman shot someone in the head in Dark Knight Returns? He's been citing this example for almost a decade and it straight up didn't happen. Is there a panel that can be misinterpreted in that book? I think, looking at
That's a great question.
Like looking at it, I think there is some ambiguity. I think that later commentary about Batman not having taken any lives, I think sheds more light on that. But as far as, I can't say like why he might have had that takeaway, but we all have instances where, and I'm not defending or anything, but like we've all had instances where we have a certain memory of something, right? And clearly like reading Watchmen and reading Dark Knight Returns was like super formative for him as it was for many of that generation in particular. And so I don't know if that was his takeaway from that scene and like that cements in your head as like, that's what happened.
It's also his vision, not anybody else's. So we might like, look, there's people that stand on both sides of the fence from top to bottom who talk about the final scene in A Killing Joke, right? Oh, it's his neck cracking. Oh, or it was thunder or lightning. because it was raining outside, right?
Right.
However you want to interpret it, that you're allowed to do that. No one's allowed to tell you that it wasn't. If there's ambiguity there, and that's what he saw, and that's what he wanted to work into the vision for the movie that he wrote and directed, he's allowed to do that.
Yeah, and I think you've answered the next part of the question where Jan says, essentially, if Snyder misread or misinterpreted The Dark Knight Returns, should that impact our reading of the art itself? Right. Is it ultimately up to your own interpretation? How much should the artist's comments or interpretations of their own art impact our interpretation?
That's, if you use the word like if he misinterpreted it, yes, but he doesn't think he does. So that is us saying he misinterpreted, like if he misinterpreted it, right, but he didn't. In his mind, he didn't. Misinterpretation is what you say to someone else who you don't agree with. But that is but that term put together doesn't work, especially if the one is objective or subjective anyway.
Well, I think the argument, I don't want to dwell on this, but I think the argument here is that it's not just a matter of interpretation, that it's more a flat out misreading, that when you go back and you look at The Dark Knight Returns, like objectively, this character doesn't die the way Snyder claims that it happened. But I think ultimately my answer is probably the same as yours, where hypothetically, if you sat Snyder down and you like walked him through those pages and you made an argument like, no, he didn't actually kill this guy, I don't think that would change. I don't think he'd be like, oh, I got to go reshoot that scene. I think probably not. He took something from that, and that was the basis for that scene one way or the other. And yeah, clearly The Dark Knight Returns. I'll just say really quickly, one of my favorite moments from the movie comes straight from Dark Knight Returns, where Bruce has that line to Clark, I bet your parents told you were special, that you were sent here for a reason. My parents taught me a different lesson, dying in the gutter. Yeah. The world only makes sense if you force it to. So I dug that.
And isn't he pulling him by the cape at that point? Like saying
he's tied him up at that point.
Fucking dude, that's awesome.
Filmmakers and movie fans alike should be sure to attend these film festivals: Brightside Tavern in Jersey City, Hang On to Your Shorts in Asbury Park, Point Lookout on Long Island, and Round Reel in Bloomfield, New Jersey. Take it from an alum of two of them. Submission information for filmmakers, as well as details about the festivals, can be found at filmfreeway.com. Follow the festivals on social media for news about events, discounts, tickets, and more. Also, listen to the Hang On to Your Shorts and Cullen on Film podcasts, available via a shared universe network. This episode made possible in part by educator, hobby comic book collector, and pop culture enthusiast Sam Lim. Sam is based in the South Jersey area and is looking to connect with other comics fans as well as retailers. They're also looking for comic shops to explore, so recommendations are welcome. Be sure to follow Sam on Instagram at SZL Comics to see their latest comic pickups and shop adventures. Acme Comics is a locally owned and operated comic book store in Greensboro, North Carolina, for people of all ages and walks of life. With more than 40 years and a new second location to its name, Acme is a multiple-time Eisner Award nominee. The shop features a significant contemporary and vintage selection, as the Acme team uses their collective knowledge and resources to connect you with the best material. Mail order subscriptions to new releases are available, and all offerings are available anywhere via mail order. Follow Acme on social media and eBay, listen to the Acme Cast on all podcast services, and visit acmecomics.com for much more. This really brings us to the climax of the film, and we had touched on this earlier, but after a very kind of methodical, cerebral, character-focused movie here from most of the proceedings, we get into this huge CGI slugfest with Doomsday at the end, right? Lex, of course, gaining access to the scout ship and the Genesis chamber, gaining control, bringing in Zod's body, corrupting it with his own DNA, creating the deformity, the abomination, Doomsday. There is such a great moment, though, when Superman shows up at the ship and confronts Lex again, and Lex is like, I don't know how to lose. And Superman goes, you'll learn. Yeah. So good, man. Such a great moment. But then this leads to our big battle with Doomsday. And I just want to say real quick, as a payoff to what we saw in Man of Steel, where he was on day one and Metropolis saw untold levels of destruction. One of the first things Clark does this time around is flies Doomsday into space. So like you see the character has learned, he's trying to take past experiences into account. But ultimately, right, this culminates in this big battle, Superman, Batman, and Wonder Woman, the Trinity against Doomsday. here's the thing, and this has come up, and even when Zach was here and we did our ranking, he asked me about this, and the going so far as Doomsday and the death of Superman in the second outing for the character. My position is what it has been, where I've really come around to the idea that the death of Superman can be used in different ways. And
Sure.
While initially and traditionally, and kind of the way I think about it, is the way it originally unfolded in the comics, where he's far along and that loss is felt in a very specific way.
Right.
Here, it is really that death that, I don't know, allows people to finally see him for who he really is, right?
Yeah.
Now, we don't get to see the public's reaction to his resurrection,
Right.
because we don't go past Zack Snyder's Justice League. But like, that would be fascinating if you have all of these people who are seeing him as a god and then he literally rises from the dead. But in this context, whether you doubted him, you condemned him, whether you thought he was this god who couldn't die, like you see the reality of it, and you see the sacrifice that he's willing to make. And so I think the death serves a different purpose here. It's earlier in his journey, and it's for a world that has doubted him. And that's what ultimately galvanizes them and allows them to come together and see him for who he is. So the fact that we went this far, it was surprising. Not totally surprising, because the trailers gave away that Doomsday was in it. But the fact that they still went that far, it was surprising. But I'm open to it. As for Doomsday himself, how was your, I know you hit on this before, but how did you feel?
That was rough.
Yeah.
That was rough. Also wasn't a big fan that it was like a Zod thing. Like I'm back and forth, right? I liked, Doomsday, of course, it's got to be the three of them taking him on. Like, that's really cool. But how it was done versus the actual story, the actual horrifying story of like the experiment of Doomsday. And it's like, what actually happened? And there was a lot of like, dude, that was rough. And it was just like, you kind of just made this thing, right? This abomination that you wanted to be Doomsday, but you don't make it evolve the way Doomsday does. Like, one of the biggest things about Doomsday is you can't kill it the same way fucking twice, right? So it's this big fight, dude. It's this insane monster that keeps coming. But you don't even show that with like going down in a certain way and like growing the new thing. Like he does, like he starts off looking like a baby, right? And then he gets like the things, but like there's not enough Doomsday in the monster to be Doomsday, but it's got to be Doomsday, because what the fuck else would it be? So I didn't like that. Like, I wasn't a fan of it, man. I wasn't a fan of that. Like, it should have been Doomsday, but it couldn't have been. But it had to be because of what it is. So it's kind of like, because what are you going to do? Bring Zod back? Like, that doesn't make any sense. So the fact that it was Doomsday, but done how it was done and executed the way it was, I was like, that left a really bad taste in my mouth. The only thing that balanced it out was I got to see the three of them in action.
So that's the thing. Like, structurally, you need a final boss for them to fight now that they're united. So where do you go with that? And yeah, I agree. It's like, short of bringing Zod back, I mean, they could have come up with
the only thing you got,
else,
because you haven't established anything else.
Right. And look, especially if you want to go so far as Clark sacrificing his life for this world,
sure,
then it is a natural fit.
It's got to be. But that's what I'm saying. It's forced into being that, though.
Right. I think for me, and this is, I don't know, this is kind of an unusual thing for me to harp on, I feel, but it was the visual representation of Doomsday. And I feel like Snyder has said at some point in some interview that something to the effect of like, oh, well, this wasn't necessarily meant to be the final Doomsday or the final form of Doomsday. And the thing I'm saying is like, how many times were you planning to use Doomsday realistically?
Yeah, I think that's a weird cop out, because again, well, it's not really Doomsday. That's just what Lex calls it. He said it'll be your Doomsday. Motherfucker, come on.
Well,
you know what I'm saying?
That's the thing. So like, if you're going to do Doomsday, do it. And here's the thing that I find so baffling. Number one, Snyder is known for his visuals. And it's not as if he deviated from the comic book look, but he went with something better. Yeah. Right? Like, this was, I think most would agree, a lesser version of the Doomsday design. And then the other thing that makes this kind of infuriating is, in the comics, look, there's only so much meat on the bone when it comes to Doomsday. His whole thing is his look and the fact that he's this force that comes out of nowhere. Yeah. So it's odd to me where the visual component is so intrinsic to the appeal of the character, and to strip that away. And then you add those weird energy blasts. Like, what the hell was that? I feel like that just made it not unwatchable, but it just kind of muddied it up, where I feel like if they had scaled it back a little bit, you still could have maintained the physical threat of this, but kept it more grounded. So that's kind of what I wrestled with.
If you just made it this insane, different looking monster, not called it Doomsday, you would have sidestepped a lot of this shit. People might have been like, well, you should have just made it Doomsday after the fact. But I think when you make it Doomsday in the way that you did, the very toned down version of what it was, with this weird skill set of like, just make it like a monstrous Zod thing. You already got the movie, man. You got your Batman versus Superman. You need a final boss to make it some fucking sludge looking, you know what I'm saying? Make it anything. Because now if your plan was to bring this universe, this world ending, like that's what you do, man. You drop him in there and that's what he does. So you now neuter Doomsday, the character, because you wanted to draw people in, because that's what you saw in the trailer. You see Lex going, this is your Doomsday, and you got all psyched up, and then you saw it was like, it looks like Bedrock from Youngblood. Like, he doesn't even change, to the point where you're like, that's not even fucking Doomsday. And then you're gonna be like, well, it's not, we're gonna bring him back later. At that point, you're just going back to the well for something that you fucked up.
It's particularly heartbreaking because a few years before, you had Smallville's relatively low budget television version, which,
and you keep saying that one's really good
for what it was, particularly how they used him, where he was typically in the shadows. It I think it worked. And then shortly after this, we would get into the Krypton TV series, which did an amazing job with Doomsday. And so it's like,
he started from the green wrap in that one, right? With the goggles and shit. Like, didn't he start off with like the traditional,
Superman and Lois kind of did a takeoff on that.
Okay.
The Krypton, I don't think he did, unless I'm misremembering.
I think it was Superman and Lois what I was thinking of.
But it's just like, here you have this big budget, you have this visionary director. It's like you have all of the tools at your disposal. It's just kind of odd. So the fact that they went Doomsday, the fact that they killed him, I'm okay with that. I think it works for this story. But it was just kind of weird to represent him in that way.
Watch, you solve the whole problem. You didn't need the Zod actor there. If you think that this thing could possibly be like infectious because it's an alien, wrap it up in some green shit, throw a Lex fucking label on it, give him the goggles, let him sit there like a fucking mummy in like the green tech suit or whatever. Then when he shows up, have him be like regular man size. And every time you start beating this dude around, he starts ripping out of that thing. You solve the fucking problem.
That was just a Michael Shannon dummy. Like, how realistic did that look? It's
my
crazy.
God, dude, that's fucking creepy. But then like, don't even show Michael Shannon. Like, if you know that you have Zod in this chamber and you have Kryptonian DNA, why wouldn't you wrap it up? You got him in a big fucking dome anyway. Wrap him up. Say it's a LexCorp thing. Stamp it. Just make it that green starter kit, basically. And every time he gets batted around, or when he dies, like he starts ripping out of it, that would have made a lot of people fucking happy. I don't know why you made it look like Shrek, basically. I don't know. It was just like that part. And again, I really like the flick because of rewatchability. And I talk about this all the time. I'll watch them. But that was just like, oh man, dude. I wish someone with like some VR skills could just recut that and make it the one that we want to see. But seeing them all together, I think that was the counterbalance, because I was like, this is fucking cool. You've never seen that shit. So I just thought it was really dope.
Yeah, I've killed beings from other worlds before. No, like it was like that. And I think that carries a lot of it. And I feel like you do feel the weight of the sacrifice that Clark makes. I mean, when he has that farewell with Lois, when he's like, I love you and you're my, it's like you know where this is headed, and she knows where this is headed. Yeah. And again, you feel it. Not to nitpick, I don't like, it always bugged me about throwing the spear into the water just so that Lois will have something to do.
Yeah. Oh my God. I forgot about that. And you just brought it up.
I was just like, all right, guys, come on. I did like, though, that despite all of the commotion, Clark still hears her pounding for help despite everything. So that was nice, but it was just
which I guess is your callback to how she gets stuck in the beginning. Yeah. Maybe, but like, I could do without that. Yeah. I didn't need that.
And then we get the whole funeral sequence where again, you see the world in mourning, and it's very, it's heartbreaking, right? Like this, it took his death for people to really, again, I think see and appreciate him for what he was. Again, probably not unrealistic. And I love the juxtaposition between the public, well-attended memorials and then the smaller, more modest, but more personal and heartfelt funeral in Smallville. And you see Pete Ross there coming back from the first movie. And even Father Leone, who was the priest that Clark went to when he was deciding whether or not to reveal himself to Zod. He's there as well. So yeah, I mean, I thought that was really resonant. I don't know. I continue to enjoy rewatching this movie.
I do.
And if our conversation has inspired any rewatches or anyone to watch the Ultimate Edition for the first time, that would be great. And if you do,
and if you don't
let
like
us
it,
know.
Please have a reason why you didn't, and not just this sucks or Zack Snyder this or the Martha thing. Please try and watch the lens. Please try and watch your Martha lens through someone who had childhood trauma, who lost someone, lost a parent. If you lost a parent, maybe you're going to view it a little bit differently this time. That was that trigger moment. That was the gut punch. Try and jump off the, can I make a meme fast enough for this generation, and start to get into the fact that it was a story that had to be told. And there was no other way to make that happen. Do me a favor, try and make that happen. If you still don't like it, at least now you've viewed it through that lens and you're like, nah, it still didn't do it for me. That's fine. But try and keep open about stuff. Look, if we talk about anything on this show, is don't hate watch something, right? Don't, just because, rotten fucking tomatoes and those ass, and like, just view it, man, because you might like it. I ate my own words and I admitted it to all your people. I was like, I'm never going to watch Aquaman 2. And it turned out, I'm like, I actually kind of like that flick. I also like Shazam 2. And these were movies I decided that I was never going to watch. But it's out there. If you like it, have a reason. If you don't like it, at least engage someone in a conversation that goes somewhere and end on a moment where you could be like, all right, well, it's still cool. I still like you. We don't hate each other because of it, because that's just ridiculous, man. Like, life's too short for that shit.
Totally. And I keep saying this, but as a podcaster, but as a Superman fan, like, I appreciate these movies lend themselves to very in-depth conversations. And there's a lot to discuss and to debate and to wrestle with and to think about. And I love that. And I appreciate it. So this was a pleasure as always. Everyone should follow Real Life Lobo on Instagram and check out the Not So Secret Dad's Business podcast, available on all major podcast platforms. Justin, as always.
Which now, if you listen to, you will think it's Anthony's show because Nate ran like your entire opening for it. I thought I hit the wrong one. But again, dude, I say it all the time. I'm not gonna juggle your balls more. Like, coming on here, time goes by. This went by just as fast as the Ultimate Edition. I felt like it wasn't even happening. I looked down, I'm like, holy shit, it's 11:30. But again, there's very few people I would skip my second round at the gym for. You're definitely one of them. Her, I was like, I would have went to the gym. You, though, I know these things are important.
Well, I appreciate that very much. So thank you, as always. Audience, appreciate you tuning in. Make sure you come back next week for the conclusion of our Snyderverse trilogy. Of course, we will be discussing Zack Snyder's Justice League. So make sure you come back. Until then, as always, it's about what you do. It's about action. Be sure to check out our sister podcast series, Another Exciting Episode in the Adventures of Superman, an episode-by-episode breakdown of the classic George Reeves television show, available wherever you get podcasts. Please join us on social media, become a patron, and subscribe, rate, and review today. Links are in the show notes. Thank you all.